So I picked up a job doing HVAC or heating and air installations right after high school. I enjoyed the job too, more so the people that I worked with every day, as we were all pretty like-minded. Didn't want to be here and just wanted to go home to our families, or in my case, my dog. Now, not long after I graduated, my dad gave me an ultimatum. Go to school or get a job. Either way, you're not going to live off of me and my house anymore. I knew that it was coming. All my life he'd been saying things like, when you're done with school, you're out of here, or you're going to be living like I did, independent and struggling to survive. My father had a rough life as a kid. His parents abandoned him, leaving him to his grandparents to raise. According to my dad, he would have much rather been left on the street, and that's about as much as he would tell me. Anyways, my mother wasn't around, as I'm sure she couldn't stand my dad early into their relationship, about 9 months exact, and, well, you can probably connect the dots. Anyway, it was about 1.5 years into my career, and I was learning pretty fast, climbing the ladder from apprentice to being assigned to a designated crew in no time. I was paired with a guy named James, a good man that struggled with his moral compass sometimes, dealing with a split family and one of his own. The job in question, it started just like every other day. Go to the office, pick up the equipment for the day, chit-chat with the other guys, and then head to the job. It was a nice neighborhood, which was a relief, as the area that we live in is a 50-50 whether or not you're going to be jumped or tipped for your work. The house, it stuck out like a sore thumb though. Overgrown grass, decayed roof, destroyed decor in the yard, cracked concrete in the driveway from tree roots growing under it, trees forming a vegetated tunnel over the driveway, and a detached garage that looked as if it hadn't been touched in like 20 years at least. James looked at me. Of course we have to get this one house, right? Something felt off, I thought though. I mean, maybe their house broke and just cannot afford anything other than the house payments and pulled a loan for this job or whatever, but I wasn't sure, and it didn't matter, to be honest. We were here to do a job and get paid and then just go home anyway. Now, something that stood out to me immediately was the windows were completely black. Not a tinted black, but a solid black. No light in or out. I stayed at the truck as James greeted the homeowner. I looked over at him as he knocked on the door, and within seconds she answered, but wouldn't open the door but maybe 4 or 5 inches according to James. He came back to the truck and had an odd look on his face, one of confusion or disgust. I really couldn't tell. She said to meet her around back, he said. This home was built in a very heavy grade, meaning the basement was a full size and easily accessible through a normal man door. James, he went around and I began getting tool bags to carry around as well. As I walked around the corner, I noticed coming from the detached garage that there was music, which meant that maybe somebody was in there working on a car or something. I sat James's tool bag down by the AC unit and I went inside. Immediately, I got a chill down my spine. It felt cold and eerie, and there was a musty mildew smell that just filled up every corner of this basement. James, he had a scrunched up nose and squinted eyes, obviously displaying disgust. The homeowner, they just sort of went upstairs as I walked in, as I could hear her going up the steps. The basement was separated into 2 parts though, a garage-type area where I was working with a wall cutting it half from the other side of the door, and a full wall separated the garage area from the living room area, which we'll get to in a little bit. So I looked over at James as I set my bag down and asked softly, "Don't you have the creeps about this place, man?" He looked at me and just nodded and went outside. It was time to start tearing everything out anyway. Everything was going smooth. I had already put the new furnace in its place and started attaching ductwork. There was a small fluorescent light that illuminated my workspace, and other than that it was really dark. I also couldn't see past the light when I turned around, making the backdrop of the light completely black, which also made me feel as if I was sort of in an interrogation room, I guess. In any case, I tried my best to just stay focused. I went to cut a high voltage wire and sparks flew and I jumped out of my skin. I could have sworn that I turned off the breakers. How could I have gotten the wires out of the old ones without turning the breaker off after all? I mumbled to myself. Because I tripped the breaker too, the one light that I did have had turned off now. I sort of shot up and went to reset the main breaker. I flipped the breaker on and the light came back on, and as I turned around, I froze. The homeowner was right there, and this had been the first time that I had seen her. She was pale, absolutely no color to her skin, around 5 feet tall, in her early 80s maybe, and had wrinkly old skin that folded around her elbows and face like a Shar-Pei. All I could get out was a hi, and she scared the ever-living heck out of me. She didn't say a word, though. She was hunched over a little bit and just sort of looking at me, her eyes almost black. She grinned a little bit and turned away and went back upstairs. She made no sound as she walked, almost as if her feet didn't even touch the ground. It spooked me, and at that I took a break. I walked up to the van and sat down. Hey, you good, bro? James asked. Yeah. I got to meet our customer finally. He just looked at me, eyes widened. She's weird, isn't she? He asked. I just raised my eyebrows in acknowledgement at this. I went back to work, though, and I got to a point where I needed help with something and called our office to send a tech out to help us wire something up. It was around noonish at this stage, and I was ready to eat, so I ordered some food off of DoorDash, as I don't like leaving the job to eat. I hung out with James until food arrived, and we both stopped and we ate. But the whole time, just something felt off, like something was watching us while we worked. I felt like I could reach out and touch whatever it was, even though I couldn't see it. In any case, our tech arrived about the time that we were finishing eating. His name was Arnold. Arnold was a religious man like myself too, and we connected on that a little bit. We often talked over the phone or text about things going on in our lives and what we could do to help ourselves with God. Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, didn't ask if I wanted anything to eat? He said. Hey, we didn't know that you were coming, or we would have, James said. Arnold was kidding, though. He would often use a sort of cliche humor. James stood up and started to brief him on all that we had left to do, and also mentioned our lovely customer as well. He described everything to him, like her appearance, our interactions with her, and the feeling that we got when we go into the house. Arnold shook his head and claimed that we were a couple of chickens and that we were scared of an old lady like this. James shrugged and said, Okay, well, when you meet her, you'll understand. Up until this point, she only spoke once as far as I'm aware of, and it wasn't to James at the door. I went inside to grab something at one point. I think my wallet, I cannot remember, but something like that, and I came out pretty quickly. Arnold looked at James and I and said, Well, let's get this done. I've got a couple of other calls after this. But as soon as we stepped inside, something just wasn't right. James led and looked down at our tool bags, and they were sitting by the door, now perfectly packed and closed. Now, I can assure you that I did not move them, and I certainly wouldn't have put all my tools away as we weren't finished. And it was then that I concluded that something just did not want us in there, indirectly telling us to leave by putting everything together for us. Chills ran up my spine, but Arnold, he didn't even seem fazed, acting as if we did this to try and freak him out, and he just walked right on past it and asked me where everything was. James came back a minute later, obviously startled, but Just wanted to be done at this stage. Hey, I'm going to go and change the thermostat. Neither James or myself had actually been in the house at this stage. Arnold, he walked through the door and inside of the second room where the furniture and the arcade machines were all covered in clear dusty plastic, just like horror movies. It was very dark in this home. We flipped switches and nothing came on, so we eventually resorted to flashlights. Arnold went up the stairs and called out, "Hey, ma'am, we're gonna put your thermostat up, okay?" There was no reply, but we could hear footsteps upstairs. I got about halfway up the stairs and I turned around paranoid because I just felt like something was behind me. And I swear to you, at the bottom of the steps, there she was, standing there, silent, just standing there straight and still like a statue. And again, I swear to you that her pupils, they were almost glowing with like a very small white light. Then it hit us all. A smell. One that I had never smelled before, but it was so potent. Arnold gets up to the kitchen and flips the switch on for the kitchen, and a small overhead light over the sink turns on and begins buzzing. I tapped James on the shoulder and whispered, "Hey, man, she's at the bottom of the steps." James' face turns pale. I knew what he was thinking. How long had she been down there, and was she hiding in that room? He leans over my shoulder and sighs. "Bro, no one's there. What are you talking about?" I thought that I just saw her, and I then turned around really fast, and he was right. No one was there. I look at him. "Dude, I swear to you that she was right there." It was about that time that I said that Arnold also acknowledged someone. "Hey, you must be Miss Brown?" She was slouched over like an elderly person and replied with a simple "sure." I have honestly never heard anyone reply "sure" to that before. "Well, I'm gonna get this thermostat put up for you, alright?" I was still shocked. I mean, she was right behind me. I know it for a fact. James and I walked the rest of the way up, and we stood in the kitchen watching them. She just stood there, staring at Arnold. Now, if you remember, I had mentioned the windows being solid black. Well, it was around about now that I figured out why. They were covered with industrial black trash bags, taped around the window sill to lock out any source of light coming in. That smell, though, was still present too, and I had never smelt anything like it before. The odd thing was that the house was clean, though. Tables, counters, all clean. Arnold finished up and turns to her and told her, "Well, you're all set up and ready to rock and roll." She just looked at him. A smile started to grow on her face that felt like it went past her eyes. "How many kids do you have?" she asked. Her voice was strong but high-pitched, like a typical older woman's voice would be. Excuse me?" he replied. "Well, there's Anne, Barbara, and Chuck, but there's one more, isn't there?" Arnold was completely shocked and was now wide-eyed and looking at me and James. As far as I knew, he only had 3 kids. And yes, that was their names, but how the heck did she know? By the looks of things too, she didn't have any electronics, no cell phones or anything to look him up. Like she could anyways, I mean, she'd never met him and dispatch doesn't give our names out like that. Suddenly, a darkness filled the room. It felt heavy and my heart began to sink. Arnold's wife is pregnant. I can feel her. What's her name gonna be? Clara? That's what your wife picked out. She pointed and bounced her finger at Arnold. She looked at James, and it was then that he booked it down the stairs. He didn't want to know what this demented lady was going to say to him, I guess. She then slowly looked at me, and I will never forget this till the day that I die. Marissa, she said 3 times. That was the name of my unborn child that died because of a miscarriage. I wanted to scream at her, but I figured that she wanted a reaction out of us, and she kept pushing. Arnold was silent, as I was. We both knew what was going on at this stage. Possession, maybe a witch, who knows, but we knew that we needed to leave. She never made an advance toward us like she wanted to hurt us, but her posture suddenly changed. She stood up straight, smiling, barely any teeth showing, but the creases of her wrinkly smile almost touched her ears. And it was then that I had had enough. I made a break for it, and I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, stumbling once. I sped walked to the work truck where James sat in the driver's seat with both hands on his lap, pale and shaking. I'm sure that I looked the same, to be honest, but I looked over at James and said, "Man, to heck with this, let's just go." Right as James put the van into drive, Arnold came running past the truck, got in his van, and also sped off. We started driving away, and I thought to myself, did I get my tools? Was she really possessed? I mean, a million things were running through my mind in about half a second, it felt. It was the longest drive back to the office that I've ever had, too. We didn't collect any money for that job, which was normal procedure, but to be honest, we didn't care. The next day, James called for a meeting with our manager and told him everything about the comments that she was making to not collecting the money. Our manager looked at us and just asked, "So you didn't get collect?" James and I looked at each other, and James asked, "Did you not hear anything else that I just said? She knew Arnold's kids' names, man." He laid back in his cushy office chair and just said, "We'll have collections call her and finish it up. Please just collect next time, alright, guys?" Everything that we had to deal with, it just felt like nothing to him. I mean, I suppose it did sound extreme and off the wall a bit, especially towards someone that doesn't really have any religious or spiritual views. After that, though, we heard nothing about her, and there was no confirmation that the money was ever collected or anything. James and I, we're still good friends to this day, but Arnold, well, he quit about 3 weeks after this, stating that he just wasn't cut out for this trade anymore, even though he had 15 years of experience. Arnold and I, we still talk on occasion, but we never talk about that day. Man, I still hear her sometimes in my thoughts, or I even have nightmares about her from time to time. I'm still at the same company, but really no one ever talks about this, except for James and myself. This is a bit of a short one, but it's always stuck with me because of just how creepy it is. So, this happened a while ago. I often go hiking with a metal detector in the mountains near where I live, an area that saw heavy fighting during World War I. And one day I ended up in a really remote, steep section that's difficult to reach on foot. And hidden in the moss and roots, I found a narrow and deep hole, almost invisible unless you were right on top of it. And at the bottom of this hole was a small children's bicycle. You can see it here in the picture. Now, there were no paths nearby, no signs of human activity, just this single bike lying at the bottom of the trench. I immediately feared the worst and climbed down to go and check, but there was nothing else, just this bike. I took a couple of photos, but I've been thinking about this ever since I saw it. I mean, who carries a child's bike all the way up there, and why throw it into a hole that no kid could possibly reach? It still gives me chills, and while I reported this to a couple of rangers back then, I never heard anything about it, and really nothing seems to have come from it. This happened a few months ago, and it still creeps me out whenever I think about it. I wasn't even going to share this, to be honest, because it's not super dramatic or anything. No chase, no ghost, no true crime moment. But the more that I think about it, the more that I realize just how off this whole thing was. So, here it is. I work at a small electronics store in a plaza about 30 minutes from where I live. It's not a dangerous area or anything, but we close pretty late, and sometimes I walk home if I miss the bus. I know, not the smartest idea, but I like the quiet sometimes anyway, so it's no biggie. Anyway, this was one of those nights. It was around 9 p.m, dark but not pitch black yet, and I was walking through a quiet residential area about 10 minutes from my apartment. It's a peaceful neighborhood, tree-lined streets, warm porch lights, the occasional dog barking behind a fence, you know the kind. As I was passing by this parked car, a dark grey sedan, kind of old-looking but not junky, the driver's window rolled down. There was a man inside, late 50s or early 60s, grey beard, a bit heavy, wearing what looked like a delivery uniform. I didn't recognize the company logo. He had this calm demeanor though. Not threatening, not nervous, but just very casual, I guess. He said, "Hey, can I ask you something real quick?" I stopped walking. I didn't get close, but I answered something like, "Yeah." He smiled and said, "Would you mind helping me with something? I've got something in the trunk that I want to show you, and I think you'll really like it." Instant, full-body chills. You know that sort of gut drop feeling that you get from time to time that something is wrong? That flash of this just isn't right that your brain sends before your logic even catches up? I kind of froze and asked, "What is it?" He tilted his head slightly and gave me this smile. Not creepy in the exaggerated movie way, but just way too calm and too relaxed. And said, "It's better if you just see it. You seem like the curious type after all." I took a step back and muttered something about being in a hurry. I didn't want to wait for his response. I just walked away, fast but not running. I didn't want to show panic, and I didn't want to provoke him. But I was fully on edge. Thankfully, he didn't follow me. He didn't open the door, just sat there in the driver's seat watching me go the whole time. But here's the part that stuck with me ever since then. The part that made my skin crawl, even more than the trunk thing. So as I was walking away, almost at the corner, maybe 20 feet away I would say, he called out again, same calm voice. "See you around, Lewis." I hadn't told him my name. I don't even think we exchanged more than a few words, in fact. This was probably the weirdest encounter that I have ever had in my life, and I'm wondering if anyone has any advice for me in case I see this man again. I ended up reporting this incident to the police after all of this. A few people had some really good points as well, and even if nothing comes of it, I figured that it's better to have it on record than not at all. The officer that I spoke with, they definitely took it seriously, asked a bunch of questions, and said that they keep an eye out for any similar reports in the area. They were honest about the fact too that they really couldn't do much without more to go on, but they encouraged me to reach out immediately if anything like this ever happened again. I also went back to the area during the day and knocked on a couple of doors as well. There aren't many houses nearby, like I mentioned, but one person did have a doorbell camera. They were super kind too and let me look through the footage from that night. And of course, the spot where everything happened was just out of frame. You can actually hear a faint part of our conversation though, which was kind of surreal, but you cannot see the guy or the car clearly, frustratingly close in fact. As for now, I've decided that I'm going to take the same route home again tonight after work, just once. Not because I want to run into him again, trust me, I don't, but because I want to see if this was a one-time thing or if he's actually hanging around that area. I'll certainly stay cautious, and if I see anything off, I'm not going to engage at all. Just get out and call it in, really. So, I finally worked up the nerve to take that same route home again, the one where I had the first encounter with the man in the car, and it's been a while, maybe a couple of months since it happened. I figured that he was some random creep passing through, that he'd be long gone by now, but he wasn't. Same car, same exact spot, same man, just sitting there in the driver's seat under that flickering streetlight like he'd been waiting the whole time. And here's the part that really messed with me. The car looked completely untouched since I saw it last. I'm talking a layer of pollen and dust thick enough that someone had actually drawn something into it, a little smiley face on the trunk. It wasn't there during the first encounter, I'm sure of it, but now it's faint, like it's been weathered by days of wind and grime. There's also a dead leaf stuck between the hood and the windshield wiper that hasn't moved an inch, and all four tires are sitting just slightly deeper in the dirt than before, like the weight of the car has been pressing down on the exact same spot for days, maybe even weeks. I have no clue how I didn't notice these details the first time, or maybe they weren't there yet, but it really, really looks like that car hasn't moved a centimeter since the night that he talked to me. I didn't say anything this time. I didn't even slow down, but I saw him watching me again. Same calm, almost bored expression. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just watched me pass by, almost like he knew that I'd come back eventually. I won't be going that way again. I thought the first encounter was the creepy part, but now I'm realizing what's worse. That he might be just sitting there the whole time, doing nothing, saying nothing, and just waiting. I don't know what for, but I certainly don't want to find out. When I was around 22 years old, I had a scary encounter while staying at a hotel for a job. It was around 2010. I was working for a traveling photography group that took church directory photos. Each photographer drove separately from all over the place. So I was in Harlan, IA at the time. I was staying at a hotel along with the other photographers who joined with me. I believe that there were 4 of us, 2 guys, a girl, and myself. One morning, I went down to breakfast and was watching the TV in the hotel breakfast area. Someone was also down there nearby, a guy that I didn't recognize. But when he looked at me, I said good morning, as I do wherever I go, just to be friendly. He said it back, and we just sort of had a bit of a polite exchange, I guess you could say. Something that you would do with a stranger that you never thought that you would see again. He mentioned that he was staying there with his team for like a construction job or something. I eventually go to leave, and I say something very casual, like, have a good one and see you later. And he said something like he could hang later. I didn't think anything of it, to be honest, and just brushed it off like, yeah, maybe. Now, I don't remember if this was the same day or not, but as I didn't work until 11 a.m., we tend to work from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., give or take a little bit, depending on the size of the church, etc. But I decided to go and take a nap since I didn't sleep well the night before. And while I was laying in my room, I kept receiving phone calls to my room phone. I wasn't used to getting calls like that, ever, so I picked up. I would say hello, but nobody would answer. After a few minutes, I eventually just took the receiver off and placed it beside the phone so that it would stop ringing. When it was time to get up and leave, I left my room and I saw the guy was there in the hall. I sort of waved casually, still not thinking anything of it. He asked where I was going, and I said that I had to go to work. My friend showed up, a female photographer, and I went with her to her car as I was going to ride with her to the church that day. I told her about getting strange phone calls, and she mentioned that she did as well. Later that night, there was a thunderstorm. My photographer group and I stood by the hotel lobby door watching the lightning that night. It was thundering and extremely dark. There were chances for tornadoes, so we were keeping tabs with each other that night. Eventually, I go to my room for the night and I hear a knock on my door. I really did not want to answer it, but I did, cracking the door to see who it was. It was the guy. He talked about how I said that we could hang out, and I told him that I was way too tired after working all day and I needed to get some sleep, and so I shut the door. Now, I cannot remember if this was the next morning or still at night, but I recall him knocking again, but I wouldn't answer. I pretended to either be out or sleeping. I called my mum and started to talk to her at one stage. I told her what was happening, and although I was a little bit scared, I'll admit, I almost acted like I wasn't when speaking with her. Suddenly, though, and I really don't know how to explain this, but I just got this weird feeling. I whispered to my mum, "Mum, hold on a second. I just need to check something." I tiptoe as quietly as I can over to the room door. I look out of the peephole and I see him. I then see him turn his head to my door as if he was listening for something. My heart instantly started to race. I then saw him move to the side, and you know how the wall sometimes goes in for the door, so there's like a sort of indentation in the hallway for each room? Well, he goes to the wall away from the room that juts out. I think that he thought that he was hiding or something, because he would try to lean his head out around the corner of the jut-out portion as if listening or something. I walked to the further side of the room quietly and whispered to my mum about how I'm pretty scared by this. I called the front desk to complain like my mum suggested. I cannot remember if I also texted my friend or called her, but she also complained to the front desk about the various phone calls that she'd received. Eventually, we were given new rooms, and the construction group manager was told by the hotel about one of his guys and that this creepy guy was told to stay away from us. I even told some of the church people about the situation, and they all said that if we needed to stay with them, that we could. All very nice, but still all strangers to me, and I really didn't trust anyone at that point. I'm not sure whatever happened to him, as I didn't see him after that. I was a little jealous of my friend because she ended up with a hot tub in her room and I didn't, but it was fine. However, after that, I was certainly more aware and careful with who I talked to and what I said. So, there's this woman that I know, Paula. She's maybe 4'10", 85 pounds, originally from a country in South America somewhere, and freakishly strong. I used to take yoga with her, and we did aerials and pole together. She's also nearing 60, but you'd never guess it. She's so fit and tiny, almost ageless in this intense sort of wiry and even vibrant way. But I've never quite known what to make of her, really. I wouldn't say that we were close, though for a little while we started to get closer because we were around each other a lot. The thing is, though, is that she started subtly sort of mirroring me, doing her hair like mine, painting her nails the same color, styling herself in ways that felt oddly specific. She even bought me some clothes, and it didn't feel like a sweet gesture. It felt off. Like she wasn't admiring me, she was trying to wear me, or maybe even be me. And then one day we were at an open poll together with one other person there. The studio doesn't have dim lighting, it's actually bright and fluorescent. She was doing a sideways pole sit and I could feel her watching me. We are both extremely flexible, but I have a connective tissue disorder, so I have a slight edge on her, which isn't a big deal to me, but she is extremely competitive, probably even a covert narcissist. But anyways, I had just done something kind of splitty and I turned around to smile at her because it felt like she was looking at me. And when I did, I swear to you that her eyes were completely black. I mean, fully black. I looked for several seconds because I couldn't look away, but she seemed vacant, not checked out, but absent. Like she'd gone somewhere momentarily and she was temporarily checked out, but yet it also felt like there was something in her place, like an energetic placeholder. Something also seemed to be looking out through her, but it wasn't necessarily an intelligent being. I was left with this feeling of, I don't think that I was supposed to see that, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't know that I saw this, but also I don't know if she was even aware of something happening, to be honest. It's like when you accidentally see a mic in a movie or a crew wearing jeans in a film set in ancient Rome or something. It wasn't a weird lighting thing either. Again, bright fluorescent lights at the studio, or a blink or anything. It was unmistakable, and I've never seen anything like it before or since then. I'm also pretty positive that nobody else saw it but me. It only lasted a few moments. I finally stopped looking at her and walked over to the table where my stuff was, and took a sip, and then everything was back to normal. And look, I know how it sounds. I tried to rationalize it too, gaslight myself into letting it go, but I just cannot do that. Not with everything else. The mirroring, the vibe, the way that I never felt entirely at ease around her. I'd really like to hear what other people might make of this though, because I honestly don't know if I'm just reading too much into it, or maybe not enough. This happened in 2020. I was 21 at the time, and it was the first time that I'd rented a place of my own. After spending a year with a horrendously bad housemate who changed 180 degrees after a month of living together, I was genuinely happy to finally be alone. It wasn't a super good apartment or anything, but I was just so happy that I had finally gotten away from that housemate that it didn't even matter to me. I had the bare necessities and a roof over my head, and was looking forward to spending my days in a quiet house next to the woods. It was a huge old 3-story house that got split up into multiple apartments years ago, and most of the people living there were homeowners, besides me and another guy who was renting a flat on the first floor. All of the neighbors, they were super friendly and we got along just fine, sometimes spending hours out in the garden with them just chatting or drinking some lemonade as it was super hot that summer, despite being quite far from the busy city. Anyway, about 1 month later, the neighbor below me, female and around 50, knocked very aggressively on my door, which was wooden with a wooden frame. Not the best security, but the house did have a metal front gate and all kinds of alarms set up around the house, and the yard even too, since there were some brown bear sightings quite frequently, almost daily in fact, which I didn't mind, but she told me in a quite aggressive way that there was some water on her ceiling, right below my bathtub. I told her that I would call the landlord and tell him about it so that he could get someone to come out and check it out. She didn't seem pleased with the answer. The landlord didn't really care either, as he'd actually got a 2-month-long vacation out of the country and told me that he would get someone to come out, but he didn't. I thankfully had some amazing neighbors though living next to me who let me shower at their place without even paying them or anything. I made them some handmade stuff and digital drawings of their dogs as some sort of payment, because I felt so bad for not being allowed to actually give them a fee for letting me do that. 2 weeks go by though, and My awesome neighbors tell me that they have to go away for work for a few days and apologize for not being able to help me until they can get back, which honestly was super sweet of them, but totally unnecessary. I mean, I completely understood. For the next 2 days, I took mostly what you might call a hooker's bath. I had always been a very clean person, and not being able to shower properly was truly starting to get to me as well. I decided to heck with it in the end. I'll get in the shower really quick so that I can just wash my hair, as the sink was too small to do so, like an A4 paper size. Back then, I had the habit of getting into the shower with my headphones on and just listening to podcasts. So, as soon as I was done washing my hair, I put my headphones on and continued with the podcast. Everything was great. I felt super clean, and once I was almost done rinsing off, my absolute psycho of a neighbor bashes my bathroom door open and starts yelling at me like a maniac. I was absolutely terrified, as I didn't even register it being her at that time, as it all happened so quickly. I got out of the shower as fast as I could and called my landlord, sobbing while this maniac Karen was going to get her phone and call the police or something. She kept yelling that I was flooding her newly renovated apartment. I was shaking like a blob of jello caught in a tornado by this point. This psychotic woman actually kicked my door so hard that it broke the wooden frame right by the lock, and that's how she got in. Now, get this though. This woman was married to a cop, just as insane as she was, and she actually convinced him to get 2 of his cop buddies to come and threaten me for damaging their apartment and not fixing whatever was wrong. This crazy Karen sent a video to the landlord, and I kid you not, there was just some small drops of water dripping from the ceiling whenever I showered for longer than 10 minutes, as the landlord had left the floor under the bathtub with no tiles, just plain concrete, which allowed the water to seep through once in a while. Being still in shock from being barged in on like this and seen by a stranger butt naked, I didn't call the police straight away, though I doubt they would have listened to anything, since this maniac's husband was basically one of their bosses or something. I'm sure they would have spun it around and made me look like I was the insane one flooding their apartment or something. I gave them my ID though and told them that I had talked to the landlord, and also gave them his phone number to go and check. I showed them proof of text between me and the landlord as well, but by that point I could tell that they sort of started to whisper between them and that they left after giving me a warning. The Karen was very satisfied by this too, to say the least. She was so happy that she managed to scare me straight, in her mind, I guess. I later found out from my upstairs neighbor, which was the longest staying resident of that house, that she actually had some beef with my landlord like 15 years ago, and that's why she did what she did to me. She couldn't stand anyone who moved into that apartment, just because she got into a fight with the landlord years ago and tried to make every renter's life a living hell, apparently. If I had known about that, then I wouldn't have moved there, but of course nobody told me, because making some side money was apparently more important than somebody's safety. I was lucky enough to find another place to stay in like less than a week, and had enough money saved up for a deposit as well. I had horrible nightmares for months to follow, and I still get them occasionally. I cannot wear headphones properly to this day, and I have to have one ear out, as I'm still paranoid that someone's going to break in and I won't be able to hear them and react in a timely manner. I know, I sound stupid for not getting the cops involved more, but I was scared out of my mind in that moment, and I didn't know what kind of connections that they might have, since they just got 2 unrelated cops to show up, in uniform, out of nowhere. In any case, stay safe out there, double check your doors and windows, and stay far, far away from terrible landlords who don't care about anything other than money. And also, be sure to stay away from psychotic Karens who literally break into your house and scare the living heck out of you. My spouse and I met in our first year of college around 14 years ago. We spent a few weeks as acquaintances in a large group of friends, and didn't really get to meet one another well until this event. For a little bit of backstory, our group of friends loved to take walks in the woods. Our campus was surrounded by forest. Unfortunately, everyone had class or work during the day, so we often waited till night when everyone was free to go on these walks. We were very comfortable in the woods at night. It just felt like a perfectly natural thing to do, really. Anyway, this particular night, which happened to be the night before Halloween, a bunch of our friends were dropping out for one reason or another. Homework, tired, tests, all that stuff. Eventually, the last one besides my future husband and I dropped out. But knowing that him and I didn't really know each other that well, that last friend told us that we should go on the walk together anyways. It was a little bit awkward, but we were both friendly people, so we decided to be adventurous and make the best of it. So we headed out into the woods just being acquaintances, and decided to walk down the path that would take us to a place called the altar site. Named that way because it had a log kind of shaped like an altar where college students often left knickknacks and stuff. Unfortunately, in the dark, we didn't know this path as well as we thought we did, and we realized that we were getting lost. We joked about having to spend the night out there and said, "I hope you aren't afraid of survival cuddling." After 45 minutes of walking in what seemed like circles, we started to realize that it might not be a joke after all. So we then decided that we would just try and pick a line and start walking as straight through the woods as we could. We were hoping that this would get us out because we knew that the entire section of woods was surrounded by roads or ocean, and we knew what to do once we hit one or the other. It was pretty rough though, let me tell you. We walked into trees, rivers, swamps at one point, and just kept going for another hour or so until stumbled out onto what seemed like a larger trail than what we had been on. At this point, we started following the trail, hoping that it was a main trail, and we would use it to find our way out. Honestly, I was pretty thrilled by this. I remember jumping out onto it, smiling and saying, "We're going to be okay, this will surely get us out." We followed it out onto a small meadow where we unfortunately lost sight of the trail again. Hoping that we could see it again in the woods on the other side, we walked across the meadow and entered the tree line on the other side, only to realize that the trail had now completely disappeared. We were about to turn around too when we suddenly heard a loud and crisp, bloody scream in the woods nearby. It must have lasted like 10 seconds, and it felt super close. The sound can only be explained as sort of a pig bird woman screaming bloody murder. We stood there for a second, and then I asked, "What was that?" Future husband said, "I don't know." And so I suggested that we head back into the meadow where we could at least kind of see things. So we headed back into the meadow and we just sort of stood there for a few minutes, not sure what to do. We couldn't find the trail and something just sort of screamed into the woods at us. It was a truly dreadful feeling knowing that we weren't alone out there, but had no idea how to get away from it. And it was then that I heard a thick branch on the ground in the tree line near us snap, and a thick bushy tree near it started to shake like something moved in it. Right after that, there was a sudden scream again, and whatever it was definitely right under that tree near us. This scream lasted for what felt like 15 seconds, definitely longer than the first one, and I remember suddenly hugging this acquaintance that I was walking with out of fear. It was kind of awkward. I remember apologizing right afterwards. He told me years later that if he hadn't have been scared out of his wits, that hug would have been very enjoyable, and that it was kind of nice having this girl latch onto him like her life depended on it. Because honestly, I thought that it was about to be the last hug that I was ever going to get. At this point, we were at a loss as to what to do, and I remember turning and looking behind us and making out what looked like it could have been a trail curving around the bend. I guess we must have missed it because we had walked into the meadow thinking that it was the trail. I pointed it out to him and We got back to the track and started heading up the new trail path. We had brought our terrible flip phones with us, hoping to use them as flashlights. The brighter one had died earlier on the trails, but mine was still working. Unfortunately, I couldn't see anything with it, and so I just started flipping it open and shutting it, hoping that it might scare whatever was out there. When we got about 20 paces up the trail, I started to hear a pattern of noises behind us. Since it was fall, the trail had leaves on it, but since it had gotten walked on a lot during the day, the leaves in the center of the trail were sort of flattened, but the leaves on the side were still very crunchy. I kept hearing leaves on one side getting stepped on, then silence, and then leaves on the other side of the trail crunching. It sounded like something was moving from side to side behind us on the trail, trying to get around my side of vision almost. That was when we heard the scream one more time, and this time it was right behind us. We both started running. Stupid, I know, but it's what we did. It was only about 20 more paces, and suddenly we were out of the woods and in a large meadow that we both realized that we recognized. We ran to the other side of the meadow and got to the paved road right near campus. And weirdly, nothing followed us out of those woods. But we did hear the thing scream one more time from the tree line. We ran back to our dorm rooms, promising to talk about what the heck happened in the morning, and it was so late that night at this point, but we were both pumped with adrenaline from the sheer terror of whatever the heck that was. I tried looking up what it might have been that night, with my headphones on in the dark room while my roommate slept. I had some woodland experience, and I wanted it to be the sound of like a screeching owl or something. I looked at all the screeching birds in the region, but nothing was quite right. They all sounded very screechy and bird-like, but the edge of human-like vocals just wasn't in anything that I found. And so in the end, I just went to bed. We told our friends about it in the morning, and it became an instant campus urban legend. People called it the Banshee in the Woods. Some people wanted to make it into a documentary project, but it just sort of stayed a local legend for a couple of years before fading away with all the other noise of campus life. Most of our friends had heard the story by that point, so I was a little bit surprised when one of our friends of ours couldn't recall it. We told him the story and described the sounds in the best detail that we could, and he said, "I know exactly what you heard. That's a cougar." I looked that up, and I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before, but I knew that cats could scream like women, but I had never heard it before, I guess, despite my woodland experience. Funnily enough, I did know from some of my tracker friends that cougars often would follow like a 5 or 6 month long territory walk. So I started keeping an ear out for any cougar sightings and activity around campus at that point. Sure enough, I was able to track down people who had seen the cat about a half a year after our encounter, with no sightings in between. And also some articles about sightings from around a year after our incident. I found some people who had found a kill site on campus as well, around 6 months after that. And in the end, we could track the cat's routine visits to the campus to line up very squarely with ours. And knowing that we were stalked by a cougar at night like that, well, that is a pretty terrifying thing to know now. I, a 21-year-old female, have a long-term partner, 24 and male, who is a pretty big guy, 6'6" to be exact. We're the type of couple who likes to do all of our errands together too, so it's been a few years since I've felt unsafe when I'm out in town. Being with him, even though I'm a smaller college girl, lets me know that creeps won't really try anything. Scary dog privilege or something like that, but him and I recently took a trip to Walmart so that he could buy some batteries for his new Xbox controllers. I'd say it was around 8 p.m. It wasn't dark out just yet, but it definitely wasn't daytime anymore. He told me that his stomach wasn't feeling all that good, as we'd just come from Olive Garden, so he told me that he was going to use the restroom quickly, and that he'd meet me wherever I told him that I was going to be in the store. I told him that I would be in the candle aisle as usual, and I went on my merry way. Now, not long after I had made it to this aisle, I noticed a man, probably in his 40s I'd say, in a red shirt pass my aisle. As he passed, he gave me one of those creepy up and down glances that a chick can feel in her soul. However, I didn't think much of the interaction, as it looked like he continued walking anyway. However, when I turned towards the opposite side of the aisle, I saw him standing a little too close to me, pretending to look at the items on the shelves while also furiously texting. He kept looking at me, pretty unashamed of full eye contact. It honestly seemed like he had seen me in the aisle, passed it, and looped back to my aisle by walking down the next one and turning around. I immediately felt uncomfortable. So I left that aisle and I went to the back of the Walmart where the electronics are. During my walk, I noticed that the man in the red shirt met up with a few other men, 2 in navy blue shirts, 30s I would say, and 1 in a grey shirt, late 20s. They proceeded to follow me to the electronics, pretending to look at home speakers while they all watched me from across the aisle. It was blatantly obvious too. The thing that really creeped me out though was the fact that, even though they were in a group, none of them seemed to speak to each other. They just kept texting and texting while eyeing each other and myself. Any time that they followed me, they would be texting. At this point, my boyfriend had been taking too long, so I went up to one of the store associates and lied about being interested in something in the case, and it was just so that I could have an associate with me until my man got out of the restroom. We sort of chit-chatted about some sort of lava lamp that I was pretending to enjoy and wanting to buy. But once my man texted me that he was in the candle aisle where I was originally, I immediately thanked the employee and I beelined straight to him. I walked so fast, in fact, that the group of men was still at the electronics, and I pointed to the group behind my back and said, "I think that these guys have been following me." Now, I definitely listen to too much true crime, so oftentimes I'll say I got a weird vibe from someone and nothing is actually wrong. So my boyfriend just said, "Oh, I'm sorry, baby. Let's just get what we need and we can get out of here then." However, in the very short amount of time that it took for us to make our way to the batteries, conveniently right by the self-checkout, the man in the grey shirt had beelined it to me. When I looked up, he was speed-walking from the electronics straight towards me, all while texting like a madman still. My heart immediately started racing, and I knew now that something was very wrong. Now, you guys know just how big Walmarts are, right? Well, he got to the front of the store from where the electronics were in the back within seconds. I mean seconds. And after he made it to the front of the store, the way that I was standing in that exact moment, I guess you would have mistaken my boyfriend and I as single shoppers who just happened to be lining up. The man got behind me in the line, so close behind me that if I had scratched my back or something, then my elbow would have hit him. However, I nudged my boyfriend whenever I saw the man making his way to me, and once he got behind me, my boyfriend made eye contact with him and pulled me in front of him. All of a sudden, after the man noticed that I wasn't alone anymore, he got out of the line and started seeming very interested in the battery kiosk close by. Once we'd gotten into our car, I noticed the same man, shortly followed by the man in the red shirt, make their way into the parking lot without any purchases, very visibly scanning the parking lot and still texting furiously. Now, where I live, trafficking is incredibly common, as most of the shopping centers in my area are off exits on the major highway that can quickly get you to 2 of the biggest airports in the south, ATL and CLT, if you know what I mean. It's easy to snatch someone up here and be on the highway for 2 hours or so either direction, and then just put them on a plane to never be seen again. And quite honestly, I think that that's exactly what these men had in mind for me that day. This happened about 2 days ago now, but I'm still very shaken up by it. So I was with my brother and father. We were just at the immigration department in Hong Kong to sort something out for us. The further context is that I'm 20 and female, and I'm not a Hong Kong local by any means. It was getting late, and my dad suggested that we start taking the bus back now to eat closer to the apartment area, or most good places would be closed soon. Midway, there was a stop that my brother suggested that we get off on and find food. We all agreed. I started to desperately need the toilet at one stage, and so my brother pointed at the closest McDonald's that we could see. And this was a big mistake. So we go in, my brother and dad are waiting downstairs. I was under the assumption that, well, if there's no toilet downstairs, then there should be one up, and if not, I'll leave and find another place. I walk up the stairs and look around, somewhat pacing as I desperately needed to pee. The McDonald's worker seems to have spotted me and was looking at me, almost expecting me to bother him. I ask him if there's a toilet nearby. He said, "Toilet? Up through the door, turn left and take a lift up." I turned to look at the door that he was pointing at. It's an ominous brown door with no signs or anything at the front. He's the worker, so I just assume that he knows better than me. I open it and, well, it's very dark and run down, a completely different vibe to the modern McDonald's. Extremely quiet, and as soon as the door closed, it was almost soundproofed. What I mean is that all the bustling loud noises in the McDonald's had completely stopped now. The room was just very dark with minimal white light and barely any sound. There were multiple doors that appeared locked in the building. I didn't explore much as I thought that it was maybe a staff room or something. I turned the corner as instructed, and there was indeed a lift. I assume that maybe this is a very odd passage to a shopping mall, which isn't too common in Hong Kong, and surely how bad can this be if there is a lift? So I press the lift and step in. Suddenly, I hear the door open and the worker that directed me goes into the lift with me as well. I notice that he's holding a black bin bag that is filled with little to nothing. I assume, okay, maybe he needs to put this out and help me to find the toilet. Kill two birds with one stone sort of thing. I ask him what floor do I press, and he presses the second floor. Once the door closes, it's a little bit quiet and awkward. I glance at him for a second. He was wearing a COVID face mask, one eye looking forwards and had a lazy eye looking to the side. Suddenly he says, "You're very pretty" in Cantonese. At this point, it's very awkward, and I just sort of say a quiet thank you as to not aggravate him. Eventually the lift stops finally, and I was fully expecting a shopping mall when the lift doors open. But that was not the case. The doors opened, and it was just a dark, quiet, very run-down, narrow hallway of doors. It was really dark, in fact, with what seemed like infinite corners. In fact, not a single person was there except for us. I couldn't tell what the building was. An odd cross of an abandoned apartment building doors and office doors, I suppose. At this point, we're both still stood in the lift, and my entire body is in fight or flight response as this whole situation was not making much sense. The worker gestures me to get off at this lift and almost wants to continue walking me to the toilet, it seems. I quickly make an excuse of, "Oh, I've bothered you so much already from your work. You can just point me in the direction and I'll find it, I promise." He points to the right and tells me to go through there and that that's the toilet. I thank him, but I then go to the complete opposite direction that he told me. The whole place, though, was like a maze. Narrow hallways with doors, and I got curious and pushed at one of them, and it was locked. I'm really just trying to stall enough time to appear like I went to the toilet before getting back to the lift to go back down. I get a call from my brother now, a very angry call asking why I've taken so long and where I am. I explain that really I don't know where I am. I'm trying to find my way back. I hang up and I'm getting increasingly more scared as this place is absolutely huge. As I mentioned, like an abandoned office or apartment with hallways and no signs or anything, while also being extremely dark with minimal light. The walls were all teared down as well, and it was just so quiet and run down, and there was no way that there was a functioning toilet up here. I'm really beginning to panic now, and I'm trying to find my way back to the lift. My initial discomfort of desperately needing to pee had turned to desperately wanting to leave at this stage. I calmed myself down a bit with breathing exercises and tried to recollect the steps that I had taken. And I finally found the lift and quickly pressed back down. I pressed the close button half a dozen times at least. The lift takes me back down to the hallway, but by accident I walk forwards instead of turning right. And there are more doors, 4 to 5 doors next to each other, but what was most strange was the fact that the doors were all facing this large glass panel wall between the McDonald's. I was able to look at the McDonald's and people eating, but they didn't notice that I was there at all. I walked back and I turned right this time through the door, and I was finally in the McDonald's again. But that glass wall on my end appeared to be like a large mirror in the McDonald's. It was a double mirror. I looked around and there was no sign of the McDonald's worker either. I quickly walked back down the McDonald's. I see my dad and brother. My dad asked if I was okay, as I looked really pale apparently. I said that I would tell him when we were out of there. I asked him if he saw the worker again when they were waiting, describing him as a man with a mask on and a lazy eye. But my dad shook his head and said that he didn't see any worker when he checked upstairs for me earlier. My heart sort of dropped as soon as I heard that as well, because this meant that worker was still up in that lift. My dad also said, "Don't tell me you went through that lift. I opened that door and walked through a bit to find you, and it's pretty terrifying in there. Why were there so many doors and that glass as well? I thought that there was something wrong, so I left and thought that you were somewhere else." Bear in mind, my dad is pretty built and he doesn't really get scared by much. In any case, I will never go to the toilets alone again like that, and I guess that seeing a McDonald's will forever hold this memory for me. So I only really tell this story to close friends because I know how completely ridiculous it sounds and that it sounds made up. But I thought that I would share it here to finally get it out there in the world. There were a lot of times I remember seeing these things, but only a few instances really seared themselves into my brain enough to remember them as an adult. When I was around 7, we moved to a house pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place that it was forest for like miles, your neighbors were far enough away that they probably wouldn't hear you scream in the night, and all the roads were made of dirt. Until I was a teenager and some of them got paved. There were no streetlights, no stores, and you had to drive 15 to 20 minutes in any direction to get to any town. Now, as I got a little bit older, I would start going out to adventure on the roads at night, especially on nights where the moon was full so I could see better. I would walk to the nearby cemeteries just to walk around a bit. There were 2 just down the street from here, or down to the river if I wanted to climb down the big hill past those and splash around on the shore a bit. But one night in particular, I walked down to the cemetery that I usually preferred over the other, as the path inside was newly paved, so it had a nice loop to walk around and a good tree to climb in as well. But as I came close, a tall, thin figure in a black suit popped up playfully from behind one of the trash cans on the road by the opening. This figure had to be at least 6 feet tall, stomach coming to about the level with one of those tall green trash bins. His outfit was all black, but I could tell that he was wearing a very tailored suit. On his head was a tall top hat and a white porcelain mask adorned with a big smile. I stopped walking, staring at this figure for a good second. It didn't move, and I didn't move. But then it lifted a long, slender arm and waved at me, before popping back behind the bin. At that moment, I didn't feel threatened, oddly enough. It almost felt like it wanted to play a game with me, but I was in no way interested, as you can imagine. And I was just too freaked out to turn around and leave, so in the end I began to walk backwards. I kept my eyes on the trash bin until I couldn't see it anymore, before turning and running the rest of the way back to my house. This was the first time that I saw these things, but certainly not the last, and he wasn't the only one. There was another time that I had a friend over for a sleepover. Around the time I was in middle school, and we were sitting outside of my house just talking drama and whatever else that tween-age kids do, but all of a sudden my friend saw something out in the trees. She heard all of my stories of these things before, so she stood up, ready to get out of there, but I hadn't seen it, so I was convinced that it must have just been an animal or something prowling around at night. I stood up with her anyway, and we watched the tree line a bit, waiting to see if we could spot it again. We waited, and eventually, a little head poked its way out from behind a tree. This one was much shorter than normal and more egg-shaped, again with his own white porcelain mask. This one had a frown though, and he was peeking out from behind a tree at us, then went behind again. Then he moved to another tree and peeked at us again, all the while getting a bit closer. We were scared to move at first, but eventually ran inside, woke my mum, and told her everything that we had seen. She checked it out, but found nothing. These kinds of things went on for a long time too while I was growing up in that house, and eventually we moved out. We bought a house in the town about 15 minutes away, I would say, when I turned about 17 years old. Once we moved, these sightings mostly stopped, and I didn't bring the stories up much anymore with anyone. My mum and my friends knew, of course, but it became a topic that we didn't really discuss much anymore since they weren't around. But the last scare that they provided me happened when my sister and I went back out to visit our old home as teenagers. She had just gotten her license, you see, so we drove out on a rainy day to see how everything was. I was telling her all about a totally different story, and it was about a girl that I'd met in the cemetery once. We played and ran around, but a weird noise started coming from the woods. She wanted to see what it was, but I didn't want to wander off, so she went by herself. I waited, but she never came back. She wasn't a kid from town that I recognized, and no one ever brought up her disappearance or anything. And I never saw that girl again. Then I started the, oh my goodness, I don't know if I ever told you about these things, and started spinning off the tales that I told above. And eventually, midway through, she stopped the car and told me to stop. She was visibly upset, it seemed, and she then said, "You saw those things too?" I was pretty much flabbergasted. I figured that I was the only one that they were bothering. "Wait, you saw them too?" I questioned right back. She then told me about how she had seen not only them, but even the girl that I had described. But in our house, apparently. She was sick at the time, so she thought that she was having a crazy fever dream, but I would say to a T that she described the things that I had seen, and she saw them that night. I haven't seen them since then, but I cannot make any sense of what they were. But they were definitely a fun little spooky thing that I remember from time to time now. And if it wasn't for my sister and my friend that night, genuinely I would think that perhaps I had gone crazy. Let me preface this by saying that I'm a Christian, so I believe paranormal encounters are things like demons or demonic encounters, really. That being said, I want to go back in time to, I believe, when this started. So I was 8 years old when my grandpa passed away. This was back in 2010. I'm 23 now for reference. My grandpa was always in our lives, but he suffered from COPD from years of smoking, and we only saw him when we made the 2-hour drive to his house, so it was really only around things like Christmas and Thanksgiving. When he died, I was at his house too, and it was a really hard thing for me to go through. Even now I struggle with death, and me being 8 years old, his death hit me really, really hard. Sometime before my grandpa passed away, my dad had watched 13 Ghosts on this sci-fi channel. This movie kind of freaked me out a bit. I mean, only being able to see scary ghosts with special glasses on, how could that not scare an 8-year-old little boy, right? This comes into how my parents react, which is why it's an important detail, and I mention it. But having gone to my grandpa's funeral and him being buried now, everything started to get a little bit better. Even as a little boy, eventually you get used to your loved ones being gone, I guess. That was, until I started seeing things. Not even just things, but a person. It was a tall man. He looked somewhat like my grandpa, but it wasn't him. He was tall and lanky like my grandfather was, but he wore an old duster and a wide-brim hat. I saw him one night in my closet and I started crying. My mother chalked it up to me having watched 13 Ghosts and got mad at my dad for letting me watch it. That was the first instance of seeing this man too. Another one was when I was walking to soccer practice down the street, and I saw this same figure or man standing out in the field, just watching me. I saw this man several times over the period of about a month or so, and then after that I never saw him again. Fast forward several years and I'm in late middle school. I'm probably about 13 in my 8th grade year. My little sister is 5 years younger than me, which would have put her at about 8 years old. Now, there was a night that I was having trouble sleeping, so I decided to get up out of bed and grab a glass of water. I made my way to the living room, and when I entered, I noticed my sister sitting on the arm of the couch facing the corner. Her name was Mary. "Mary, are you okay? What are you doing up?" I asked. She didn't respond. So I walked up to her and put my hand on her shoulder. And the moment that I touched her, without looking back at me, my little sister responded in a way that scared me half to death. She growled and said, "Leave us alone." This wasn't normal behavior for her at all, and the fact that she said "us" made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. I walked backwards watching her on my way to my parents' room. I told my dad what happened, and he just kind of shrugged it off. He did walk out into the living room though, wrangled my sister up off the couch and carried her to her room and put her back in bed. We talked about this instance a little bit, and even now it gets brought up sometimes. And honestly, it still creeps me out. But again, no one really gives much thought to it. Fast forward several years after that. This was probably about 2022. I woke up one morning in the spring and my dad and my little sister, they both looked like complete garbage. They were sitting at the dining table with my mum and they were talking. I sat down and asked what was wrong. My dad was talking and visibly looked like he got no amount of sleep the past night, and he began to tell us that he suffered from sleep paralysis for the first time in his life. He said that he had woken up, lying flat on his back. He could only move his eyes, and looming above him when he opened his eyes was a dark, shadowy apparition. It was a man, tall, lanky, with a wide-brimmed hat. My dad apparently tried to scream and could only manage to get out muffled moans without his mouth actually opening. This eventually woke my mum up. My mum was able to calm him down and eventually he was able to move again. My sister spoke up at this point when my dad finished talking and asked him what time this happened. He told her that it was around 2:30 in the morning, which is what time it was when he checked after he could move, and her face sort of went blank. My parents asked her what was wrong, and she had the exact same thing happen to her apparently, that same night, but at 3 in the morning. The same apparition, same size, same hat. I had trouble sleeping for weeks after this, worried that I would too be held still and just watch something come at me like this. After thinking about this in a trailer at work tonight, I didn't realize how all 3 of these encounters could very well be tied together. Beginning when I was a young boy to even when I was an adult, having put some thought into these encounters, I 100% believe that my family has had some sort of a demonic oppression that has flared up throughout the years. I was able to physically see him. He influenced or possessed my sister as a child at one point, and then caused sleep paralysis on her and my father in the same night. I really hope that no one ever has to encounter anything like this in their life because, genuinely, it is absolutely terrifying. This happened circa 98 when I was about 13. We lived next to a fenced and heavily wooded area behind one of our local YMCAs. Being that we lived in a larger city, there was a ton of crime, and a few bodies had actually been found in those woods over the years that were unalived people. We also had an extremely religious or Christian neighbor that my dad was close with, as they were both single parents. And one day she told my dad that there was a demon that lived in those woods as a result of a negative energy from all of the violence that those woods had seen. I wasn't allowed to go back there, but I still would. Never at night though, and the few times that I actually did, I would hear footsteps behind me or feel complete dread the whole way home, as I only ever used them as a shortcut to walk home sometimes from a friend's house. And look, I know that this sounds silly, but even in a lit-up city, those woods were really dark. I get that woods are supposed to be dark, and what a stupid thing to say, but I don't know. This was a different kind of darkness. It's difficult to describe it, except for saying that it just felt evil. Anyhow, 1998 and 13 years old. I didn't have the easiest upbringing. My dad was in a constant state of anxiety. We were poor, and my dad always owed money to somebody, and my brother and I were pretty much neglected, as all teens in the 90s seem to have been. I loved my dad very much, but there was always some kind of negativity or hardship in his life, which in turn was reflected onto my brother and me, because we lived with him. My mum moved out of state when I was about 10, and there was literally no solace. I lived a stone's throw away from these woods, and it all started with the reoccurring nightmares. A blackness would seep out of those woods like fog. I could never get away fast enough. It would envelop me and drag me into those woods. I had this dream every night for months, in fact. My dad was convinced that we were under attack, whereas I thought that it was just him and the neighbor freaking me out with their theories. One night, though, we were sitting in the driveway in my dad's beat-up old Volvo, but we were having an argument. I don't even remember what it was about now, but we were going back and forth, just being nasty to one another, and I will never forget it. My dad said, "Every time that we do this, we just feed this thing that lives out in the woods, you know." I laughed at him, to be honest. I remember saying something to belittle him. I just cannot remember word for word what it was, but it was something that pretty much made fun of him and the thing in the woods. And I swear to you that at that very minute, something started beating on the trunk of the car furiously. It felt like 2 fists coming down on the trunk over and over again. We both screamed in shock, and it got harder and louder, and at that moment I threw my arms around my dad and I said, "I love you, I'm sorry," and he said the same. And as we said those words to one another, the blows to the trunk became softer and lesser, until finally they disappeared altogether, and we were both in tears. Later, when we inspected the car, there were dents that looked like fists on the back of his trunk. The car was already pretty beaten up, to be honest, but I can assure you that those were not there before. They were way deeper and much more pronounced. My dad has since passed away, but even if he were alive, he would never talk about this. The few times that I tried to bring it up over the years, he shut the conversation down just as fast as it was mentioned. We moved shortly after that too. I still believe in my heart and soul that those woods have something evil living in them. And I live 3 miles away from them now, but sometimes I feel curious enough to try to go back and record to catch something. But then again, I'm honestly so terrified to even think about walking in those woods at night that I've never done it. I've been trying to make sense of something that I experienced years ago for a long time now, and I'm hoping that someone here might have had a similar experience, or at least be able to help shed some light on it. So this happened sometime around 2002 to 2003 when I was much younger. A group of us, 2 cars, guys in one, girls in the other, decided to visit a place known locally as Gravity Hill, located in New Jersey, just across the Delaware River from New Hope, PA, and also not far from Washington's Crossing Park. If you're not familiar with it, the legend goes that if you stop your car at the bottom of the hill and put it in neutral, ghostly forces will push it up the hill. Supposedly, a tragic accident occurred there involving a car and a train, and now the spirits try to push vehicles out of harm's way. I had been there a few times before and thought that it would be fun to show the girls. We did the usual ghost pushes the car uphill thing, which, by the way, really does seem like the car is going uphill, and everyone was having a good time. But that's not the part that's really haunted me all these years. So, as we were leaving, we took a back road that intersects the main one near the hill. I was driving behind the other car when suddenly my radar detector started going off, which was odd considering that we were in the middle of nowhere. At the same time, suddenly I heard screaming from the car ahead of us. Then, as we passed a farmhouse, I saw something that I still cannot explain. What I thought was a scarecrow standing in the field next to the road suddenly began hovering. Yes, hovering alongside of my car. It was a shadowy humanoid figure. It didn't move like a person or animal, it just floated, gliding next to us. Then its arms stretched out toward the back seat where my friend Dante was sitting. My brother and the 2 other people in the back were shouting at me to roll up the windows. They were understandably panicking. My radar detector went off again. I floored it, heart pounding, and we sped out of there until we reached a parking lot near a bridge a few miles away. Everyone in both cars was shaken up, and we all saw the same thing. I still don't know what to make of it. A shared hallucination, some local folklore manifesting in our minds, or maybe, just maybe, something else. Has anyone experienced anything similar in that area, or anywhere near Gravity Hill? Summers in the Philippines were slow golden things, measured not in hours but in the way that the afternoon sun poured through slatted windows and the sound of mangoes hitting tin roofs below. My childhood bedroom, it was on the 2nd floor of our home, shared with my younger brother at the time. The room was split into 2 by a removable wooden divider, and 2 sliding doors opened to an east hallway. During hot months, we'd slide both doors open and remove the divider to let the northern breeze flow through more freely. The wind almost never came from the west. It was the northern breeze that we always waited for, curling in past the silver-framed windows that opened like blinds. Our room faced 2 directions, north and west. To the north, you could see mango trees just 10 or 12 feet away, towering like quiet sentinels above the family kitchen on the 1st floor. The west view offered rooftops of bungalow homes, their silhouettes basking in the twilight. That summer night, the divider, it had been taken out. The wind had been still all evening, and the room felt heavier without its usual drift. My brother had already curled into the blue-sheeted bed to the left, while I lay staring at the ceiling on the right. I remember the faint hum of cicadas, the occasional creak of wood, and how the stillness blanketed the room like something sacred. Then I woke. It wasn't an earthquake, no shout from the neighbors, just the quiet kind of jolt, one that you come to with your eyes open and unsure why. I lay still, waiting for some kind of an explanation, a rumble, a bark, or a crash, but nothing came. I tried to sleep again, watching the ceiling and hoping the boredom of counting nothing would lull me back. But that was when I saw them. Two faint but unblinking red dots hanging in the darkness just outside of our northern window, perfectly still, perfectly spaced, like eyes. I immediately froze. I didn't scream, I didn't sit up, I simply lay there, pretending that I hadn't seen anything. I shut my eyes, slowly, letting the fear settle like a fog in my chest. But sleep, it definitely wouldn't come now. I waited long past midnight until the distant cluck of roosters teased the first signs of dawn. When the sun's light began to soften the corners of the room, I dared to look again. The eyes were gone. At breakfast, I told my parents what I had seen. My mother smiled gently and said that it was probably just the control panel in their room. It had several switches, each glowing red when turned on. You probably saw the reflection, she said. Maybe you're just not used to the divider being gone. It did make sense. Their room lay directly opposite ours, and from the right angle their control panel could reflect off of our window. That night, we did what we often did when something spooked us. We went to visit my grandparents. For a week, I played with my cousins, kicked dust in their sunlit backyard, and forgot all about the eyes. Until we came home. That night, I was jolted awake again. No sound, no tremor, just the strange invisible alarm that pulled me from my sleep again. I remember what my parents said, reflections from the panel, that's all. I turned my body naturally, pretending to shift in my sleep. My eyes, just barely open, drifted toward the window again. And they were there, two glowing red dots, perfectly spaced apart, watching. This time, though, I got up. I padded across the room and I asked for a glass of warm milk. My mother, always patient, rose and walked with me downstairs. While I sipped, I asked her again about the light. "Can you turn it off?" I said. "The reflection scares me a bit." She brought me back to the room and showed me the panel, two switches glowing red. "This is your father's phone," she said, flicking off the first. "And this is mine." The lights vanished. "Go and take a look now," she whispered. I looked, and the eyes were gone. She kissed me on my forehead and smiled. "You have such a big imagination," she said. "One day that imagination will make the world more beautiful. You know that?" I believed her, for a while at least. Weeks passed and the memory faded. I slept peacefully again. The night was no longer frightening, and it had become a part of a puzzle that I genuinely thought that I'd solved. But then it happened again. The same jolt, the same stillness, and the same dread. I turned my head towards the window. The red eyes were back. But this time I didn't panic. I knew better now. I turned towards my parents' room, expecting to see those familiar red lights on the panel. My mother's charger and my father's, the same lights that had scared me before, but this time, all the lights were off. Which begs the question, if those red lights were off and I was still seeing those red eyes, then what on earth were they? So my name is Gavin, and I'm an active duty enlisted sailor in the United States Navy. I've been in just shy of 2 years now, stationed in the southern western coast. I'll keep my ship's name and exact location anonymous for obvious reasons, but I will say that the platform of the ship that I'm on is a destroyer, and this is where this story takes place. So in the Navy, ships are, of course, made to go out to sea. My command is gearing up for a home port change, and we're at the point in time where going underway out to sea for weeks at a time is pretty much inevitable. Most of our recent underways, we've gone a reasonable distance from the pier, did business as usual, and made big circles in the ocean until it's time to head home. Usually, we go for a few weeks to a couple of months at a time, with safe voyaging typically, aside from rampant seasickness for some of us. Part of my division's job is to conduct safety drills and, in case of a worst-case scenario, exercises. But these underways are thankfully nothing like a long deployment or anything of that sort. Now, apart from listening to some stories here, as well as those that I've heard from my own shipmates, I had yet to see any of these hauntings for myself. I've had no reason to doubt the tales that my shipmates have told me, except the belief in the back of my head that they were merely taunting me or something, but I also had no real reason to believe them either. My division was the first to tell me about a spirit that remains on the ship by the name of Flight Deck Mike. I have little information on who he is or why he sticks around the ship. I thought that it was just a hoax that my division was using to spook me. But when I started hearing about him from officers and even other divisions, I definitely started questioning it. Anyway, a little over a week ago, while underway, I saw something on my ship that made me realize that Flight Deck Mike isn't just a hoax. Genuinely, I saw something that terrified me. So, another part of my job is standing watch on the topside of the ship sometimes. Topside meaning exactly what it sounds like too, the outside of the ship's hull, also called the weather decks. Everyone on my ship stands watch regardless of their rate, but this is where my rate stands watch. While standing watch from midnight till 6, I was at the aftmost part of the flight deck. The near entirety of these 6 hours are to look out for other ships, marine life, and any irregularities in the sea, and communicate those over headset. Besides being incredibly tired after doing a total of 12 hours on watch each day, this is actually my favorite time of the day to stand watch. Everything is dark and calm, and the sound of the waves hitting the sides of the ship passes time surprisingly well. It was my turn to rotate to the OD station, which I'll do my best to describe as a little shack attached to the main structure of the ship. The station is windowless, only having one door out to the flight deck. The inside is tiny and cramped, big enough to only fit alarms and a phone on the wall, and one metal chair that I'm almost certain fits the station one way and one way only. After a while of staring out into the ocean's waves, I noticed something creep around the corner of the top right of the doorframe, catching my eye only briefly, and the dark of the night I was sure my eyes were playing tricks on me. After I assured myself that nothing was there was a sort of gentle thudding noise, echoing across the wall of the station. I held my breath and felt my heartbeat rise up into my throat. No more than a few seconds later, the guy who would be my relief jumped into my vision into the doorway, with a light stomp and a goofy expression on his face. I yelled his name, telling him how he had scared me while he laughed. After a long day, a cheap scare gave us a much-needed chuckle, I suppose. We exchanged little bits of small talk, and then I had a mediocre breakfast and I hit my rack for the night. 2 more days go by, and I stand my 12 to 6 watch again. But earlier in the day, I caught wind of a younger girl on my ship, saying that she swore up and down that she saw a figure in the cameras the night before. I honestly felt kind of bad for her. She seemed pretty shaken up by it. But by the sounds of it, people either didn't believe her or they chalked it up to this flight deck Mike guy. At this point, After a few weeks out to sea, with most of us running on little sleep and enough caffeine and zins to take down an elephant, I had hoped that it was just a figment of the girl's imagination. The physical and the mental exhaustion of underways can make us all think that we're seeing things from time to time. Well, no later than 1:15, I was once again at the OD station, leaning back against the bulkhead to stop swaying from exhaustion, looking at the sky. The stars were scarce and the moon wasn't visible from the station, the faint glow from the phone and the alarms lining the walls being some of the only available light at that time. I almost didn't see it at first. But out of the corner of my eye, there was movement near the top right of the doorframe. It seemed to be the outline of a head peering into the side of the doorway. I yelled out the name of my buddy that was relieving me, almost sure that he was trying to get a rise out of me again. But this time I was met with silence. I glanced at my watch and felt a pang of worry, noticing that it was only 25 after 1. My relief wasn't supposed to be here for like another 35 minutes at least. That, and nobody on board is allowed to just walk around the weather decks at night. Anything that someone might need in the night, it has to be done while inside of the ship or simply wait until morning. Well, I looked up to whoever, or perhaps rather whatever, was standing at the doorway. A loud thud or banging sound on the station's wall began. It happens twice more, and as the sound pounds my eardrums, a lump forms in my throat. The longer I look at this, whatever it is, the closer it seems to be getting. I shuffled to the corner of the station, the only place that I could move now. It put no more distance between me and it, but I stood there silent and frozen. Slowly, it engulfs the entire door frame, looking as if it were walking right into the station. I checked my watch again, noticing that 3 whole minutes had gone by. With a loud scratching sound and one final thud on the station's wall, the black figure just suddenly dissipated in an instant. Just like that, it was gone, vanished. After a moment of standing there with my mouth hung open, I muttered into the headset that I could have sworn someone was out there with me. The remainder of my watch, I was shaking, talking to those in my division who were awake with me to try and calm me down a bit. It didn't work well though, and I struggled to fall asleep afterwards, even as tired as I was. Now, I know that this isn't the scariest story that you're ever going to hear, but the feeling of being cornered on that ship in the middle of the sea, it had me rattled for many hours, days after that. I was glad that he left me alone after that, but that night I laid awake wondering how else I would be visited by the ship's very own flight deck Mike. Myself and my new girlfriend, now wife, met our freshman year in college. We've now been together 11 years and started dating in 2013. Well, both of us still to this day refuse to talk about this, but I feel someone here may be able to explain it. During our sophomore year in New York, my great aunt from North Carolina passed away just before summer. So that summer, we planned to both go down to North Carolina and stay in the house to clean it up and prepare to sell to save my grandmother the hassle. Things were relatively normal for the first month. Nothing stuck out, with the exception of my Australian Shepherd who would refuse to walk into the living room unless it was to go outside. He, now 15 years old, always stayed in the master bedroom or the kitchen. I even got a pinch collar to convince him to walk around the 10-acre property, but as soon as he knew that we were going into the living room, he would start yelling and barking, the hair on his back would stand up, and he would just go dead weight on me. A little bit of background to help set the scene too. I'm Ukrainian American, with my mother's side being from North Carolina. My wife is half Hispanic and half white from Southern California. My wife, then girlfriend, is a devout Catholic, No Ouija boards, no tarot cards, even Harry Potter wasn't allowed in her house growing up. I'm not religious at all, really. I was raised Roman Catholic by my dad's side and Pentecostal on my mum's, but drifted away from it all in my early high school years. My great-aunt's house looked like a Pentecostal museum when we moved in. Year-round nativity sets, angels, crosses on every mantle, a Bible on every end table, you name it. The house was built in 1901, and before my aunt owned it, my great-grandparents lived there. Imagine old brown 3-foot wide by 10-foot long wood siding, tin roof, brown shag carpet, and even some traditional pine hardwood floors in the rest of the house. Anyway, about a month into cleaning and clearing the house, we started getting woken up by my Australian Shepherd growling every night for hours on end. This, over about a week, escalated to pots falling out of cabinets randomly several times a day. I'm an extreme skeptic and swore the house was so old, especially the windows, that a draft must be causing this. At this point, we were about halfway done clearing the house, and the tension and the paranoia was really starting to get the best of us. We started getting extremely angry at one another, and started accusing one another of trying to scare the other. It got to the point where I would stay up to watch her sleep as long as I could. And then it happened. We were both in bed around 2 a.m. when my dog shrieked like he was being beaten. We both shot up to see my dog on the bed barking at the door to our room into pitch black darkness. I told my wife to stay with him, and I got up to take a look around. Everything was normal. The doors were locked, windows shut. Nothing abnormal except for one thing. All the 6 little porcelain nativity scenes in the living room and the 4 in the kitchen had all been turned to where every individual character was facing our bedroom door. The one thing that was worse, however, was baby Jesus was missing from every set. I absolutely lost it, accusing my wife of trying to freak me out, which caused her to freak out, and the whole time that we're fighting, my dog is silent, staring into the living room from the bedroom. So I had a bright idea. I just knew my wife was messing with me, so I borrowed 2 trail cameras from my hunting cousin and had a tape recorder from my classes. Without telling my wife the following day, I planted the tape recorder somewhere that she couldn't see and put a trail camera outside facing the front door and one in the living room behind the recliner facing our bedroom door. Nothing happened for a few days, and we were set to leave on the upcoming Friday to move into our new apartment back in New York. And this was the worst week of my life that I'll never forget in a million years. Monday night, I wake up at 2 a.m. again to find my dog crying under our bed, no other activity. Tuesday night, I wake up from my wife having a terrible nightmare. I wake her up to calm her down and realize that my dog isn't in the room with us. I get up, turn on the lights, and it's freezing cold in the house. Summer in Sampson County, North Carolina is pretty hot though, so that really... We found my dog sitting in the living room staring into the fireplace. He wasn't growling or crying, he was just still. I tried to get him to come back to bed, but he just wouldn't budge. I went to grab his leash and take him for a walk. I assumed that he had to go potty, and for the first time ever, he snapped at me. I've trained this dog since he was 8 weeks old, and he's never bitten or snapped on me ever before or even after this. After about 3 attempts of him biting me, I left him in the living room and tried to get back to sleep. I woke up at 5 a.m. to him sitting on the bed, snarling at me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours before he finally laid down and started to cry like the night before. On Wednesday, my wife woke up at about 8 a.m. and I was still wide awake from the terrible night before. As I explained to her what had happened, she got up to make us a coffee, 4 steps into the kitchen, and she lets out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. I bounce up instantly, run over, and there's a 6-foot black chicken snake trying to climb the wall. I grew up around them, so I grabbed it by the neck and chucked it into the backyard. Side note, we don't like to kill them down here. They eat mice and other pests, so they're good. My wife, though, was done at this point and started packing her bags to head to New York a few days before I planned to leave. She left at 9 p.m. that Wednesday night for New York City. Wednesday night, I wake up at around 1 or 1:30 in the morning to what sounded like a crashing sound. I flip on the light, and the first thing that I notice is my dog is still asleep despite the noise. Again, I walk around the house and see nothing. I begin to walk back to the bedroom, and then that was when I see it. The rocking chair in the living room was rocking by itself. Thursday night, I wake up at around 3 a.m. to what I assume was a bobcat screaming outside my bedroom window. Google bobcat screams. It's terrifying, but I've heard them growing up in Sampson County, so yeah, it shook me, but what bothered me more was my dog was still asleep despite 4 or 5 very loud screams. My aunt wasn't some old lady who was frail and defenseless. I knew that there was a double-barreled 12-gauge in the closet, so I picked it up and checked if it was loaded. It was. Walked out the front door, and I fired a single shot into the ground to scare off the bobcat. But within seconds, the screams intensified and sounded like they were coming from all directions of the blackness. So, as shook as I was, I walked backwards back into the house, grabbed a handful of shells, and convinced my dog to at least wake up, and sat on the bed with him all night. The screams continued from about 3:30 in the morning up until 6:30. Friday morning, I'm done, shaken to my core, terrified, distressed, the whole nine, so I pack my bags, collect my dog, and I drive an hour to my grandma's house in northern Sampson County to get some sleep before I make the trip to New York. I'm telling her about what's boxed up and what's not, and then I begin to tell her about the freaky month that I've had. Her face goes as pale as a ghost. The most religious and serious woman that I've ever known says, "Honey, take a look at this." She hands me a detective magazine from the 1940s, modern-day true crime stories. I come to find out that the woman who owned the house before my great-grandparents was sent away to prison for life. Her crime? Murdering her husband, chopping him up with an axe, and burning all of his body piece by piece in the fireplace. With the exception of one piece of him, his head was recovered under the living room floorboards. I still was extremely skeptical despite all that. But Friday night, I took about a 6-hour nap, collected my things, and I hit the road. I'm passing through Delaware at around 9 p.m., and my phone rings. My cousin's calling, and he says, "Hey man, what's up with all the random pictures of our aunt's house?" I stop at a rest stop, and he sends them to me. They were pretty unremarkable, really. I scanned every photo at least a dozen times and never saw an orb, ghost, demon, nothing. But towards the end of the pictures, though, is where my wife is seen pulling off to head to New York. Then no more pictures of the front house except for me, standing outside with the shotgun and the picture of me leaving. Which means that something in the house was setting off the motion sensor for the camera behind the recliner, but I couldn't see anything in any of the pictures. Then it dawned on me that I had at least 10 recordings on the tape recorder to go through. I played one after another, listening for ghosts or whispers, but there was nothing. I hear the pans falling, bobcats, my dog, us arguing, but nothing spooky. So I start to listen to them in reverse order, not playing them backward to find subliminal messages or anything like that. But I get to the point where my wife is leaving, and I know that I went outside with her to talk, hug, load her car for about 20 minutes. In the audio, I hear myself talking to her as I walk out the screen door, and then silence. About 5 minutes in, my dog starts growling. Then, for less than 5 seconds, there's a screeching sound and then just dead silence again. I played it over and over and over again, trying to slow it down and speed it up to make out what it was. I tried everything to justify it was the water heater kicking on or the tin roof buckling, but no. I couldn't get it out of my head too. I didn't have a fancy tape recorder, I only had it record lectures. But I finally get back to New York, and the first thing that I do is go down to the audio lab to digitalize the recording. Once I slowed it down about 35%, it was clear as day. The most unhuman, deep, terrifying voice I've ever heard uttered 9 words, 8 of which I could make out, and then silence again. I am here, I am you, then the unknown word that I couldn't make out, and then no God. I played the tape one more time so my wife could hear it. We agreed after that to never talk about it again, and the tape is still buried in some shoebox in our storage locker to this day. I have never set foot on that property again, and believe me, I never will. This happened in February of 2016 when I was 23 years old. I was living in northern New Mexico at the time and had driven up to Boulder, CO to visit a friend for the weekend. I had taken this route several times before, so I was comfortable driving the long distance alone. The trip home was uneventful until I stopped for gas in Alamosa. This was the last real town before home, about 90 miles to go and not a whole lot in between except for a few tiny rural communities and desolate high desert landscape. It was around 6 p.m. and starting to get dark outside. Now, as I pulled out of the gas station, I noticed a dark blue sedan pull out behind me and turn into the same highway that I was. I didn't think anything of it until the car started tailgating me. I was confused because they could have easily passed me if I was driving too slow, since there were hardly any other cars on the road. When I sped up though, they did too. When I slowed down, so did they. No matter what speed I drove, the car stayed right behind me. I assumed it was a cop waiting for me to make a mistake to pull me over, but it just never did. I was starting to get uncomfortable, so in the next little town of Antonito, I pulled over onto the side of the convenience store, thinking to myself that if this was a cop, they would surely get out and talk to me at this point. They pulled up right behind me, but nobody got out of the car. I parked and waited for several minutes before driving off, with the car still following close behind. 60 miles until home now. As soon as I crossed the state line into New Mexico, I knew that this was definitely not a cop. My heart sank as I drove deeper and deeper into the dark mesa. I didn't have a real phone at the time, just an old iPhone that couldn't connect to Wi-Fi, so there was no way for me to let anyone know what was happening. It also feels important to mention here that this is a particularly sketchy area. A lot of eerie and sometimes downright frightening stuff happens out here on the mesa. I was so distraught over why this person was still tailgating me that I drove right past the last turn onto the long dirt road that would take me home. I was so distraught over why this other person was tailgating me like this that I drove right past the last turn onto the long dirt road that would take me home. Thankfully, just down the highway there was a popular and well-lit, scenic rest area that I could turn around at. The sedan, of course, pulled in right behind me. But this time, feeling brave and a bit stupid, I guess, I decided to confront them. But behind the wheel was a totally normal-looking middle-aged woman. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't that. The back seat was too dark to tell if anybody was sitting back there, but I asked what the heck her problem was, and she apologized, saying that she thought that it was her daughter's car, which made no sense because my car had a completely different state's plate and was also covered in very unique bumper stickers. There was no way that it could have been confused for anyone else's car, really. And also, why wouldn't she have just called her daughter instead of following for like close to 90 miles? It made no sense, so I told her off and she apologized again. When I got back onto the highway and turned onto my dirt dead-end road, she turned in too. I immediately pulled over and yelled at her, "Lady, stop following me. There's no out to the highway from here. It's dark and confusing and a very dangerous place to get lost. You need to turn around now." She apologized, but when I got back into the car and started driving, she kept on following me. Thankfully, I was close enough to home and knew my boyfriend was there waiting for me. But she even pulled into the driveway with me, this time getting out of her car, asking if she could please stay the night. She was so tired and to please let her in. I was screaming at her to leave when my boyfriend came outside hearing the commotion. Literally, the moment that she saw him, she ran back to her car and she just peeled out of there. The whole ordeal was so strange and so freaky, and to this day I have no idea what she really wanted or why she chose to follow my car for such a huge distance. To begin this story, it's important to understand that my dad was never a good father. He lacked all the qualities a normal mentally healthy father would, and we lived in very low-income housing. When he was in high school, he was told that he was unable to have kids due to a car accident. Unfortunately, he still could in fact have kids, and in his 20s to 30s, he actually managed to accumulate 13 kids. 15 now, I was number 13. Even though I lived week on, week off custody with my father, it feels like I never really got to know him, nor was I ever introduced to more than one of my father's other kids that were before me. My older half-sister was the only other person that I'd ever met. I don't even know her mum. A lot of this memory has been repressed into deep corners of my mind, so details might seem a little foggy. I'm 21 now, and I only recently fully acknowledged that it happened. I even confirmed it with my mum. So when I was 10, someone entered our apartment. I cannot remember what his name was, but he claimed to be one of my father's long-lost children. He seemed to be in his late teens to early 20s, and he asked if he could stay with us for a while he attempted to get back on his feet after moving up from California. I'm in Oregon. He didn't seem to have many belongings except an old laptop and was rough around the edges. Mid-length hair, light shadow on the face, fairly skinny and tall. My dad was always weird about him though. He told him that this was my brother, his family, and will be taking my room for a bit while I sleep in the living room. What was weird though was that my dad would never let me enter my old room. I remember thinking even though my new brother is kind of odd, he was a super cool guy. I mean, we played Minecraft together on LAN. He was a programmer trying to make some Skyrim-like game, and he showed me everything that he had made so far. He stayed with us for around a month. The day that he was chased out of the apartment, we were having a Minecraft redstone competition to whoever could make the cooler redstone build, and the next day, we would present what we made and decide who had the better build. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, who knows, that never came to happen because that night, I'm not sure what time it was, but at least past midnight, I heard screaming. It was clearly my father, and loud banging coming from the wall over in our apartment. After probably 30 seconds of banging, on the couch I witnessed my father, full rage, chasing out whoever my brother was as he ran out of the apartment holding a knife. My dad screamed and yelled, and he chased him outside, but as he ran away, my dad came back to make sure that we were okay. Much later that night, I went to sleep with my dad sitting in the living room until dawn, guarding the apartment. It wasn't until months later that I did find out exactly what had happened that night. Mostly my father's words, and he liked to embellish things, so definitely take this with a grain of salt. Apparently, whoever was pretending to be my brother went into my father's room late at night and stabbed him in the chest while he was sleeping. My father woke up, and since he had previous military work in the Middle East, I guess sprung pretty quickly into action as my younger sister was about to get stabbed too. My father tackled the man and wrestled him for a bit, beating him senseless. After a struggle, he managed to get free and ran out of the apartment. That's about all I can really remember, too. Recently, I asked my mum about it, and she basically confirmed the whole story and added in some bits that put it all together. My mum saw the stab wound herself and said that he never went to the hospital, but instead that she patched him up, and she's a nurse and he couldn't afford that anyway. It wasn't really that bad, she said, but I guess at some point after it happened, I also told her about it, which I don't really have any memory of, but the police at some point came by and took a look around. The impersonator was wanted in California, allegedly, Oregon and Washington for a multitude of crimes. I don't remember his name, so it's not like I could ever find out if he was caught or anything, but to wrap this up, and I don't know if this is really a good way to wrap it up anyway, but don't let random people in your house because, as I found out through my dad, that is really not a good idea. I live in a rural area with my elderly grandfather and am his primary caretaker. We have very few neighbors, no sidewalks, a small town. We have very few break-ins or really any crime in general in this area. A lot of wooded areas and farmland. My house is surrounded by woods and has a tree line separating us from our neighbors. I have extensive firearm training and also have worked as a firearm instructor in the past. So, last Friday, I'm sitting in my basement on my couch about to go to sleep. This is a pretty regular occurrence for me. My couch sits in front of a big window, the blinds always closed, and a glass door that leads outside, covered with a semi-transparent shade. You can see through it, but just barely, enough to make out a silhouette if you need to. Now, it was about almost 11 p.m. and I was watching a movie with headphones on when I thought that I heard a noise outside, which is a bit weird considering that I was wearing headphones with the volume up pretty high. So I took off the headphones to listen more closely. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the gravel driveway just outside of my door, but not walking, more like, I don't know, dancing or maybe sprinting, like they were moving very fast. At the time, I got up and looked out the glass door and I saw nothing, so I chalked it up to just being an animal. I sat back down on the couch and was about to put my headphones back on when I heard 3 distinct taps on my window, just opposite my couch. Naturally, I'm a bit startled by that because no one I know is going to do that. They would call me or just knock on my door, especially this late at night. As I stand up again, I hear the gravel in the driveway rustling again, this time louder and as if somebody is running away. The direction that I heard them running is directly into a briar patch and densely wooded area. So I grab my rifle that I keep in the closet just beside the basement door, and I step outside. Using the flashlight attached to the rifle, I scan the tree line looking for possible threats because I'm convinced at this point that some people are here to rob me. I see nothing and go back inside thinking that maybe still, probably more trying to convince myself that it could have been an animal of some sort. At this point, I turn off all the lights inside and just sort of stand behind the glass door with the shade, with the outside floodlights on. This way I could see outside and nobody could see in, just sort of watching. I was making sure everything was okay before I had to go to bed. It's extremely quiet outside, like in scary movies when they say even the bugs and the birds are silent. That was now occurring. Not a cricket or a locust, not anything was making a sound. As I'm almost ready to give up and say it was just my imagination, I see a flicker of light in the woods in front of me. If I had to guess, it was maybe the size of a dime, like a reflection of my house lights into metal or something, followed by the bushes rustling. So once again I step outside and yell, "Hey," seeing if I could scare who or whatever it was away. And that was when I hear a loud whisper. That's the best way that I can describe it anyway. It was a whisper, but loud enough for me to hear it from about 100 feet away say, "Hey," back to me. I'm freaked out because I now realize that it's another person. So I shoulder my rifle, point the mounted flashlight back into the woods again, and yell back to them, "Wrong house, dude. Get out of my property unless you want to die tonight," or something along those lines. At that moment, to my right, I hear a person whistle softly. It sounded kind of like they were mimicking a bird, two soft whistles, coming from the same tree line just further to the right. At that point, I turn and aim my rifle about 20 feet short and to the left of the tree line, not in the exact direction of the noises in case it was just some dumb kids just pulling a prank or something, and fire 5 shots into the ground to scare whoever it was away. I kept the flashlight pointed at the tree line, scanning for any movement. My neighbor's dog started barking, I assume at the gunshots. I never saw any movement, anyone scattering, never heard footsteps running away, nothing at all. So I walked down to the right side where the whistle came from. The woods are not as dense there as there are no briar bushes there, and I continued to look through the woods looking for any sign of people, I guess, but I still never saw anyone. As I'm walking back up to my house, wondering what the heck just happened, my grandfather, 84, meets me at the door asking me what had happened. He is still of sound mind, but just not so much physically. So I explained to him what had happened, loaded his revolver and set it by his bedside, in case someone tried to break in during the night. We sleep on opposite ends of the house and on separate floors, so I thought that this was the safest option. After I get him back to bed, I go to the upstairs kitchen and I get a bottle of water from the fridge. As I close the refrigerator door, I hear footsteps, but this time on the roof of our 2-story home. The lowest point of our roof would require a ladder to access it. I mean, an Olympic high jumper couldn't make that leap. My whole body is covered in chills at this point. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Utter fear is the best way to explain it. My grandfather, being almost deaf, of course didn't hear it, and I'm sure he was already back asleep anyway, but I instantly froze, listening. The footsteps were heavy, grown man-sized at least. They were walking slowly from his room to the kitchen area where I'm at. There's a skylight on the roof of the kitchen, so I remain still and look up towards it, praying that nothing would be looking back at me. I waited a few minutes, the footsteps continued, back and forth from one side of the house to the other. I decided to run back downstairs, and quickly I grabbed my rifle and run outside, not knowing at this point who or what I'm dealing with, just relying on my training to be able to neutralize the threat if I need to. I try to calm myself, focusing on controlling my breath, as I go to the front yard and begin to scan the roof with my weapon's mounted flashlight. Again, I see nothing. I walk around the house, scanning the trees and the roof for any signs of anyone or anything, but I saw nothing. I repeated this twice, yelling out a few times, "I don't know what you are, but you better get the heck out of here." And eventually I just gave up. Returning inside to watch some TV with my rifle in hand all night now, I sat there and really, that was the end of it. No weird or unnatural occurrences since that night. Needless to say, the last few nights have been a bit rough for me with little to no sleep. I'm still unsure exactly what happened, and I mean, I've never had any hallucinations before. I'm not sure even hallucinations could be that real. I told some family and friends what had happened, and they all kind of brushed it off. They said that I could have imagined the footsteps, or the whistle could have been a bird. It was kids playing a prank, stuff like that. But I just am not so sure about that. All of this has left me wondering a few things. Am I crazy? Did I actually hallucinate all of it? If I did, why did the hallucinations only last for like one night? Could it have been an extremely well-executed prank? Well, I guess. Although I'm really not sure who would have done that and not have jumped out with cameras after or something, announcing that it was a prank. The whistle could have been a bird noise, sure. I'm not a bird expert by any means. But the loud whispering of hay or the distinct loud footsteps on the roof afterward, I really don't think birds can speak or are like 200 plus pounds. Anyways, that's my story. It's the first possible cryptid encounter that I've ever had, or paranormal or whatever. I've experienced some weird, unexplainable things in my past, but I'm definitely a skeptic at best as far as paranormal things go. But that encounter, it definitely freaked me out and has me questioning things, even now. Wendigo, boohags, the wampus, nobby, the skunk ape, all these cryptids have crept in and out of Carolina's and Appalachia's history for centuries, most of which can be quickly disregarded as myth or paranoia. One thing that has always bothered me, though, is when you compare the folklore of Scotland to Appalachia. The names may be different, but the stories and the creatures are the same. When Pangea split, the Scottish Highlands and Appalachia were the same place. Compare these stories with the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, also the same place, and you'll reach the same conclusion. Rural North Carolina is ripe with superstition and always has been. From the flat plains of the Sandhills to the rolling muggy Piedmont area. From Crybaby Bridge to the Devil's Tramping Ground, the supernatural and unexplained grasps the very heart of rural North Carolinas. Now, I admit that the not deer may very well have been a hallucination, but my question for you is, can more than one person have the same hallucination? I am not and never have claimed to be an expert on the paranormal or the occult. Despite my skepticism and belief in my own ability to protect myself, I do believe that something lurks in these woods, and I don't think there's anything anyone or I can do to stop it. Growing up in rural NC, people were always superstitious. The community that I grew up in was a largely agricultural community that still to this day is pretty isolated. My hometown has one gas station, no grocery stores, a population of 161, and one caution light at the crossroads. To have fun, we did the typical things that you'd expect southern kids to do. We rode ATVs, swam in the local ponds, drank cheap booze, and yes, occasionally we'd harass the local cows. I still to this day have never seen some cow tip, but I digress. One thing we used to do growing up, though, is go snipe hunting. It's a prank that you always play on an outsider, or a new kid to the group who'd never played the game before. A snipe is a small flightless bird common, or to the story passed down claimed, in the Carolinas that's relatively easy to catch. The premise is simple. The group and the unsuspecting butt-of-the-joke player would walk as far as you could into the woods. The player being pranked would be given a trash bag to carry. That player was supposed to hold the bag to the ground for as long as it takes while the rest of the group chased the snipe into the bag. However, the catch was as simple as it was mean. The group, after leading the new player into the woods, would abandon him in the woods. Usually the player would get the hint and come walking back relatively soon. I was, unfortunately, the player being pranked on April 18th of 2005, my 11th birthday. I had been inducted into this awful game by 3 of my older cousins and their group of friends. I just wanted to be a part of these 8th and 9th graders groups so bad that I would have done anything, to be honest. Living there, I had one neighbor to my right who was my widowed uncle, and then not another house in sight. Really just tobacco and soybeans as far as the eye could see. These were my closest friends and the only kids that I ever hung out with. To give you a little bit of perspective on just how small our community is, my graduating high school class in 2012, it had 21 students in it in total. My entire high school, grades 9 to 12, did not equal to 1/20th of the size of my wife's graduating class. Anyway, so I'm standing in the middle of this swampy, muggy, moss-covered, dark forest waiting for my friends to chase a small bird into my trash bag. It's just past dawn and the woods are getting darker and darker every minute. We were never allowed to go into the woods at night growing up. I was no novice to the woods. I was a Boy Scout my entire life up to this point, and had traveled through most of the woods in my area. The woods, they can be a weird place though. Even during the brightest time of the day, take a moment to look into them as you drive. Despite the brightness, you can never see more than 15 to maybe 20 feet into the woods from the street before it gets dark again. When the sun sets, even if the moon is full, the woods become an eerily dark place very quickly. Have you ever heard a deer make a distress signal to another deer? It almost sounds like a loud sneeze with a slight whistle to it. It's pretty distinct and actually a little bit funny to hear. Like the deer is telling his friends, "Yo, there's a kid over here holding a bag, let's bounce." Anyway, I heard a quick two of these sounds and chuckled to myself as I kept holding that trash bag. Another thing I'd like all of you outdoor activists to keep in mind while I'm telling you this is, like I said, I grew up in the woods, did Boy Scouts, I've hunted deer, bear, bobcat, boar, coyote, and elk. It's not the sounds of the forest that should bother you, though. It's actually the absence of sounds that really should bother you. Animals like owls, other raptor species, crickets, beavers, cicadas, etc. are not inadvertently scared of humans. I mean, sure, if you walk within 3 feet of the crickets in that area, they'll definitely stop chirping. But the area all around you will still be louder than your TV at 50% with crickets, owls, and cicadas. Anyway, after about 3 hours in the woods, I began to get tired and sat down with my back against a large pine tree. I was starting to get the idea that this was a bit of a joke, as I hadn't heard my friends yelling for hours at this point. The crickets chirping and the owl hooting were actually really relaxing and peaceful, and if I wasn't soaked and wet, I probably could have really just slept there that night. It's pitch black in these woods, loud as any night before, and I'm alone with a few owls, crickets, and cicadas. But at the drop of a pin, without a moment's notice, suddenly, there's just dead silence. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, no cicadas singing. It took a few moments for me to realize how quiet it actually became. I looked around, but it was obviously useless. Nothing but really blackness in every direction. Growing up hunting with my grandfather, I was always taught to be quieter than your heartbeat, especially when the woods go quiet like this. It usually means that a predator is around, like a black bear, maybe a bobcat, or perhaps a coyote or something. I slowed my breathing until I could hear my heart slowly beat and beat and beat again, but I never heard a sound. No steps in the leaves, no bear marking a tree, no coyote huffing and puffing. I listened so intently to the point that all I could hear was the echo of my heartbeat getting faster in my own ears. But then, a whistle. This had to have been a human whistle, though. It was so clear and had rhythm. Like, imagine a cowboy calling in a herd. It was a bit like that. It was a quick whip whistle that was no more than maybe 25-30 feet behind me. I assumed it was one of my cousins looking for me, but for some reason, every fiber in my being told me to not move and to not turn around. Do not make a sound was the only thing going through my head at the time. My brain was trying to protect me, I think, and if that was my subconscious going into prey mode to save me from pain, well, I'm thankful, but I don't know. Maybe it was my instinct trying to warn me. Again, I'm not really sure, but if it had been my cousins, I would have definitely heard them walking up at the minimum. In fact, most likely they would have been yelling for me to come back to the house on their way to retrieve me. The hair on my neck suddenly stood up and my heart began to race like I was running a marathon. Another whistle, this time less human, more screechy, almost mimicking a human like a bad parrot. Still no footsteps, not a single other sound in these woods, in fact, besides my heart about to jump out of my chest. Another whistle, and this time no more than 10 feet behind me. It was congested, screeching, and definitely not a deer. A disgusting, putrid smell filled the air all around me suddenly, like a chain smoker's sigh after they come back inside, combined with the smell of like roadkill. Then, dead silence again. I couldn't have moved an inch, even if you had offered to pay me $1 million at this stage. I swear my mind went into prey mode. I was already dead. No point in struggling and making it worse. I sat with my back against that pine tree for at least 45 minutes, taking as small of breaths as I could and being absolutely as quiet as I could, but dead silence still. I must have sat there for 45 minutes or so, and then the smell disappeared. The crickets began to chirp once more. The owl, who had been silently observing what I thought was going to be my demise from above, let out a single hoot. The cicadas began to sing, and my stomach finally settled back into my chest. I thought to myself that I've got to get out of these woods, so I drop the trash bag and stand up and begin my roughly 1 mile walk back home. As that bag hits the ground and I take my first step, dead silence again. I, standing at this point, begin the process all over of being dead still, but this time no whistle. This time just a single deep breath, probably inches behind me, and again that putrid smell. With every muscle in my body telling me not to, I still turned my head a little bit around to look at the pine tree behind me. Antlers were wrapping around both sides of the tree, only inches from where my shoulders sat. Then a single tone, the quietest, calmest, warmest, most enticing, welcoming, short, and sweet whistle that I think I've ever heard. Instantly, though, the crickets went berserk, like summer instantly became winter. The owls invited friends and they were all screaming. The cicadas were no longer singing, they were just belting. At that, I turned, and I just ran with everything that I had in my body left. Every 10 or so feet, I'd glance over my shoulder. Not a footstep in pursuit. No antler moving, nothing. Just the absolute chaos and echo of the woods in utter darkness. I finally made it to the clearing of the pasture and hop under the electric fence. The woods are still screaming at me to run, but I've got to catch my breath. Then there's dead silence again. A single whistle comes from the woods no more than just beyond the first set of trees, and when I hear that, I run all the way home and I never look back. I get home at around 7:30 a.m. and the sun is coming up finally. All my cousins and friends are passed out on the couch after an all-nighter Halo session. I sit down and lean my head back to try and forget and just sleep. I'm starting to finally daze off when I look out the window towards the woods. It's still just as dark in those woods as it was the night before, but out of the corner of my eye, I see something black, so I jump up and wake my cousin Daniel to get his rifle with a scope. He laughs his head off and he hands me the Ruger, because apparently the black trash bag that I had left in the woods somehow had made its way out. My sister and I went to the beach yesterday since it's still warm out in New York and we wanted to get some sun. Since it's after Labor Day and schools are back in session, there are no lifeguards there and really it's pretty isolated. We arrived around 11 in the morning and there was a couple sitting near us, as well as a man who was walking in the sand with his headphones in. Around 1 p.m, the couple who was sitting near us left the beach. The man who was walking in the sand was still there, and further in the distance were 2 women sitting on their beach chairs. My sister was sitting in her beach chair, and I decided to lay on my stomach to get the back of my body more tanned. When all of a sudden I hear my sister say in a very fearful voice to me, "There's a man coming toward us." But the man who was walking the beach with his headphones in came walking toward us, swinging his arms back and forth. I immediately got up, and he was now on the edge of my beach blanket. Both my sister and I panicked in the moment and basically froze. I asked him if he needed something, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at my sister and me. My sister said, "Let's get our belongings and let's just go." We got off our beach blanket and we exited the beach, but the whole encounter really had my sister and I shaken up. I mean, I don't know what he was going to do to us, or if he would have been waiting for us in the parking lot or what. But the look in his eyes is something I'll never forget. We immediately contacted the police after this and we filed a report. Back in 2009, when I was 19, I was dating this girl who was 21. I was in college and living at home with my mum. My girlfriend and I had been together for about a year at this point. She had been invited to a co-worker's party in a nearby town. I wasn't feeling well that night though, so I decided to stay home. Now, to get from our town to the co-worker's town, you had to drive through a long stretch where it was just woods on both sides of you. I think it was late fall at that time, so it was getting darker earlier. She was driving home at around 7:30 or 8 o'clock when she called me from that wooded road just to chat along the way. But the call ended suddenly. You might be thinking the call got dropped because, well, she was driving through a wooded area, right? And that's what I thought too. She called back almost immediately. I answered the phone, but it wasn't her. It was a deep voice, but it was completely clear. What I mean by clear is that it wasn't like staticky or anything. To this day, I 100% maintain that it was not radio interference too. Anyway, the voice was deep, clear, and sounded urgent and angry. It was speaking in a language I've never heard before. It wasn't German, French, Romanian, Spanish, or whatever. It might be dramatic to say this too, but the voice didn't sound, well, human. I wish that I could somehow record my thoughts so that I could post the memory of this voice for all of you to hear, because it was just indescribable. I remember sitting there though. I was in my bedroom at the time, completely frozen, holding the phone to my ear. I eventually got up in a panic and ran to my mum in the living room. I handed her the phone and frantically said, "Please listen to this." But as soon as she put it to her ear, the phone hung up. Just like before, my girlfriend called back almost immediately. I hesitated to pick it up this time, but when I did, it was actually her. And the first thing out of her mouth was, "What the heck was that?" According to her, I'm the one that called her back, and when she picked up, she heard the same voice that I did. We're still on good terms to this day. We broke up maybe a year after this incident, but whenever we see each other, we're both like, "Remember that phone call that we had?" Whenever I bring it up, people say it's radio interference or I picked up another call somehow. I'm willing to accept a non-paranormal explanation if it's a good one, but it was definitely not radio interference, so do you have any other suggestions or thoughts? So I don't encounter much these days regarding the paranormal. However, I remember a distinct day as a kid that I'll never forget. My grandmother of Vietnamese descent used to tell stories of her ability to sense the presence of unearthly beings dating all the way back to her childhood. The earliest story that she recounts is walking home from school with her friends along an abandoned railroad in Vietnam. She recalled an old tale of a lantern shining in the distance that will lure you into following it, and described it as a trap that would intentionally lead you far away from where you were intending to go. Long story short, she and her friends began following this lantern that never seemed to get closer to them. This went on until it was dark outside, and she realized that she had been following this light for hours. She was told as a child about this phenomenon when she was younger, as I mentioned previously. Her parents told her that apparently the only way to rid yourself of this is to wipe urine onto your face. I know that sounds questionable at best, but these were her words. Apparently once they did that too, they snapped out of it. Fast forward to my childhood though, and her later years in the States, she claimed that there was a dark portal in the room attached to my childhood bedroom. I'm not sure why she chose to mention this at a family dinner of all places, but our family was very open about these things as my entire dad's side was practicing Buddhism and believed in these things. Well, one day when I was 14 or so, I decided to ditch summer camp and walk home. About 2 miles, I think, and I got home at around mid-afternoon. I shower and start watching the show Weeds on Netflix, when I see my mum walk outside of my room towards the air conditioning control panel. She never turned to look at me or anything, didn't even acknowledge the fact that I was home, when I wasn't supposed to be, let alone the fact that she wasn't at work for some reason. There was no exchange of words or anything. She then proceeds to walk towards the living room, away from my bedroom and hallway, only to find out hours later that the garage opens and she got back from work. She questioned why I was home and I told her. Also, I told her I literally saw her a few hours ago outside of my room, only to be told that she was never home. The figure, though, was definitely my mother. I mean, without a doubt. To the point that when I initially saw the figure, I had no anxiety or any fear. I just assumed that she was home or something. I mean, I was cozy watching my show, so I figured she wasn't trying to bother me. But no, she wasn't even there to begin with. I told my grandma this story a bit later, and she told me that she saw a version of my deceased grandmother in that hallway as well at one point. I never really believed in the paranormal. I certainly didn't believe my grandma's story. I mean, urine on the face and all that. But this story, it seriously still gives me goosebumps and honestly makes me question myself. So I moved with my mum to her new boyfriend's when I was 11. I'd experienced a few weird things in my life by this point. The house was very run down and outdated before my mum redecorated, and I was put in a nicely sized room in comparison to my old one. Younger siblings get the smallest, right? But like I say, it was very outdated. I'd had a few nights here and felt uneasy, I guess, but I assumed that was due to the drastic change me and my mum went through. I'd heard banging, running up the stairs, you name it. Anyway, it was day. I often caught glimpses of something through the crack of my door and had a look, but nothing was ever there. I got into the habit of looking through the crack and then entering my room. So I did just that, saw nothing through the crack and then entered my room. But I froze in place because there stood a woman with dark, permed hair. She was facing away from me, but I could tell that she was old by her arms and posture. She was stood near my window at the right side of my bed. Naturally, I was terrified and glad that I slept on the left. I ran down in a panic and screaming and told my mum that I saw an elderly lady in my room. She didn't quite believe me at first, but was freaked out too. We left it there so that we didn't scare ourselves too much. A few days passed and I walked in from school to my mum in the kitchen. She said that she'd spoken to the neighbor about me seeing an old lady in my room. The neighbor said how there was a lady that lived there before my mum's boyfriend moved in, and her bedroom was the one that I was staying in. And apparently, she had died in my bedroom and was discovered a few days later. So that was creepy. That didn't freak me out too much, I guess, as that is the case for most houses. What scared me, though, was when Mum asked me what color was her hair. I thought that it was weird that she asked me, but I said, funnily enough, she had dark hair instead of grey. Mum's face instantly dropped and said the neighbor told her that she used to dye her hair dark into her later years. I didn't believe her and thought that she was just trying to freak me out, so I ended up trying to call her bluff. Mum tried to scare me most days for her entertainment, but she insisted the conversation happened. I was skeptical until my mum decorated my room. The wardrobe, it was full of old ladies' clothes and men's shoes, and under the carpet, and I swear that this is true, to the right of my bed by the window, there was a patch of decomposition staining. Gross, right? Safe to say my mum's boyfriend is gross, and I hated that room forever after. So I've been hesitant to share this, but I think it's time. What happened to me and my family in our old home, it still chills me to the bone. A few years ago, my family moved into a large old house that had been in my family for generations. It's a beautiful place with a lot of character, but from the moment that we moved in, something always felt off. The first sign was the constant feeling of just being watched. We would frequently hear footsteps when nobody was around, and doors would open and close on their own too. My parents brushed it off as the house settling or old plumbing and all that, but I certainly wasn't convinced. And one night, I was home alone while my parents were out. I was in the living room watching some TV when I heard someone calling my name from upstairs. Honestly, it sounded like my mum, but when I went up to check, the house was obviously empty. I called out but got no response. I checked every room, but nobody was there. A few nights later, while I was trying to sleep, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned around to find nothing but the dark, empty room. My heart was racing though, and I barely slept that night. The final straw came one evening though, when we were having a family dinner. A picture frame fell off the wall and shattered on the floor, and when we picked it up, the picture was of a woman that we didn't recognize. We had never seen her before, and she wasn't a relative. My parents did some research and found out that the woman had lived in the house decades before and had died under mysterious circumstances. Since then, we've had the house blessed and tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but the feeling of unease just never fully went away. I still wonder who or what was trying to communicate with us there, and I'm wondering if anybody else has experienced something like this. I would love to hear your thoughts, or if you have any advice on dealing with a haunting, because honestly, I have no idea. Let me start with a bit of a backstory. So about 9 months ago, I began working as a hospital security guard at a major hospital in my city. It's been the most exciting and enjoyable job that I've ever had. I'm incredibly grateful for it, as I've made many new friends and accumulated countless stories to share. The saying that if you love your job that you never work a day in your life really rings true for me here. I've had such a variety of experiences too, from arresting trespassers to dealing with mental health patients and searching for missing individuals, the list goes on. But those stories are for another day, because today I want to talk about something different. My experience with the paranormal. Before I started this job, I was already intrigued by the idea of paranormal activity in a major hospital. I mean, people pass away in hospitals every day, so you'd think that it would be a hotspot for ghostly encounters, right? I wish that I could say I've seen ghosts chasing me down the halls or bodies mysteriously moving on their own in the morgue, but honestly, nothing quite like that has ever happened. Still, I wouldn't be sharing this if I hadn't experienced anything at all. So to give you a better understanding of the hospital's layout, let me explain where security is stationed. There are 4 main buildings we cover. The first is the main hospital, which houses the emergency room and over 1,000 beds for both kids and adults. We typically have at least 8 guards handling calls in this building, with 1 guard stationed in the emergency room at all times, since that's where most calls come from. It's worth noting that I'm in Canada as well, so anyone can come to the hospital for, well, really any reason, free of charge. The second building, located across the street, is an 8-story medical clinic that requires just 1 guard. This guard also has to patrol the adjacent old clinical building, which is now primarily used for treating children with eating disorders. This is where the story I'm about to share takes place. The last building is the cancer clinic, which requires 2 guards at all times and is the closest to the medical clinic if assistance is needed. So when I first started the job and was shown around the various buildings, the old clinic, which we'll call the asbestos clinic due to its history of asbestos issues, immediately stood out to me. It's a building that, in my opinion, should have been demolished long ago. And during my initial walkthrough, a fellow guard told me that this building was haunted by a young girl who took her own life on the 2nd floor. He also mentioned that the basement was haunted. The whole building used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium back in the 50s and 60s, with tunnels in the basement that were once used to transport bodies. Now, about a month ago, it was my turn to work at the clinic during a night shift, and I was determined to experience some paranormal activity. I had done countless patrols of the asbestos clinic before, but nothing much had happened, aside from the elevators occasionally opening on their own, which was apparently normal. But that night, things changed. I had heard plenty of stories from other guards about strange occurrences in the clinic, but I had never experienced anything myself. I decided to do my patrol at 3 in the morning, which is often said to be the prime time for paranormal activity. I began my patrol by walking around the exterior of the building, checking all the entrances to ensure that they were locked. The building closes relatively early, around 8 p.m., so by then it should be completely empty. However, I noticed that one of the exterior doors was slightly open. This concerned me because it had been closed during my first patrol. The building doesn't have any interior cameras, so when something like this happens at night, I have to check every unlocked room inside to make sure that nobody is inside. I entered the building and started my patrol of the first floor, checking every door and hallway. Nobody was there. As I approached the elevator to go up to the second floor, though, I heard a faint creaking sound, like a door opening. At that, I immediately radioed my team lead, informing her that I had found an open door and was hearing noises. I told her that I was going to conduct a thorough patrol, and she sent one of the guards from the cancer clinic, Fred, to assist me. After searching the first floor again and finding nothing, Fred arrived. He told me that he would start searching the third and fourth floors while I covered the second floor and basement. As I was searching the second floor, I heard the same creaking noise again, the sound of a door opening, I think. I radioed Fred to come down, still not considering the possibility of anything paranormal. We've had incidents of homeless people breaking in to find a place to sleep, and though it's rare for them to target the asbestos clinic since it's usually locked, it has happened before. We searched every room on the second floor, but in the end we found nothing. After thoroughly checking the entire clinic, we concluded that nobody was inside. Fred returned to the cancer clinic, and my team lead made a joke that it was probably just a ghost. And that got me thinking, this might be the perfect time to continue my ghost hunting. So I went back into the building, determined to capture some activity. I sat down in a chair on the second floor, and I began waiting to see if anything would happen. After about 10 minutes of nothing, I got bored and I decided to head down to the basement. Now, the basement is an eerie place, let me tell you, filled with tunnels that mostly lead to nowhere now. I decided to explore one of them since I had never done it before, and this seemed like the perfect time. Once I exited the elevator, I made my way to one of the locked doors leading to the longest tunnel. Most of the tunnels were completely blocked off, but this one stretched on and on. I unlocked the door and ventured down the tunnel, taking note of my radio beeping to indicate that it had lost signal, a common issue in the basement areas here. As I reached the end of the tunnel, my flashlight started to flicker. I decided to stand still and listen for a bit, and to my shock, I heard a blood-curdling female scream coming from the start of the tunnel. At that, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, pointing my flickering flashlight back toward the entrance, and started running toward the scream. When I reached the entrance, I tried to radio my team lead, but my radio was still out of signal. I looked around the basement and noticed that one of the doors was open. This door was supposed to be locked, which only security have access to the keys for. I looked inside of the room, but nobody was there. My heart was racing, obviously, and so I closed the door and headed back upstairs to get a radio signal. I was still unsure if I had experienced something paranormal or if somebody had actually broken in, but once I got back to the main floor, I radioed my team lead to let her know what had happened. She sent Fred back to help me investigate the source of the scream. When we arrived, we went back to the basement. I showed him the room that had been opened, and we both noticed a very distinct and strong smell. Something like that of a decomposing body. Having spent time in the hospital morgue, I was all too familiar with that smell, and we searched the room, but we couldn't find anything. Fred joked that the room might have been used for tuberculosis patients who didn't make it. but in truth, none of us were sure what that room had been used for. We determined that everything was fine, and I decided that I'd spend enough time in the asbestos clinic for one night. Ever since that experience, though, I've sort of rushed through my patrols in that basement, as that smell still lingers every time I pass that room. So, what do you think? Was this a paranormal experience or something else? Should I investigate further, or should I just let it be? My first experience with the paranormal was actually a string of experiences. I was 16 and my family had just moved into a new home. Honestly, I really loved that house too. I had my own room that I picked myself, and I didn't feel any kind of hesitance while unpacking and decorating to make myself feel more at home. Everything was great. At least for the first week, that is. After school, I would get home with my little brother about an hour before my mum. And one day, I was the first one into the home. I threw my bag onto the kitchen table and found my cat stood frozen, staring at a door in the kitchen that led to our garage. I spoke to my cat. "Hey, what are you doing?" I walked towards him, but before I could touch him, a woman's scream came from the garage, and my cat literally sprinted from the room. I followed at that, taking my little brother with me outside and calling my mum. My brother insisted that he didn't hear anything though, and my mum suggested that I must have imagined it, but I knew that it was real because, well, my cat reacted like that. Once my mum got home, we checked the house to find nothing. She suggested that I was stressed and watching too many scary movies. I didn't bother to argue any further. I could tell that I wasn't going to be believed, so I grabbed my bag and walked to my bedroom at the end of the hall. I stood in the doorway, freezing in my tracks. My closet door was slid open and hanging from its track, as if someone had tried to pull it off, and my pillow was standing in the middle of the room, a flat, flimsy pillow that I couldn't get to stand even if I wanted to. I yelled for my mum. "Someone's been in my room," I accused. She came back, my little brother trailing behind her. I pointed in the room, only to find the pillow now laying flat, as it should have been the whole time. "You must have knocked it off the bed when you woke up this morning." She brushed it off, but I knew that I hadn't, and even if I had, how was it standing like that? I played with the pillow for like several minutes, trying to mimic the position that it had been in, but I just couldn't get it to happen again. I mean, it just seemed impossible to me. I went to bed that night without a problem, and while I did think that what had happened earlier that day was strange, I didn't lose too much sleep over it, but I was prone to waking throughout the night, so, like clockwork, I awoke around 3 in the morning and got up to go to the bathroom. When I returned to my doorway and to my bedroom, I froze. The light from the bathroom shined just barely into my room, making it impossible to miss because I could see a figure sitting on the edge of my bed. It had no features, just the shadow of a large man. I leaned forward, squinting my eyes, trying to adjust my vision to the darkness of my room, but before I could move any further, the figure stood and instantly charged at me. I have never screamed so loud. My feet came out from under me and I hit the floor, my hand flipping on the light before I had lost my balance. And when I looked again, nothing was there. My mum and brother were there in an instant, wondering why I was screaming and now crying on the floor. I tried to explain, but "You were dreaming," my mum told me. I was awake, I was up. I tried to argue, but she just shook her head. "You must have been dreaming," she insisted. "Go back to bed." I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, surprisingly, went fine. That is, until I was back home from school. That house suddenly didn't feel like home to me, and my room did not feel like mine anymore. I felt like I was invading somebody else's space, and I was sort of apologetic. I then attempted to make a Ouija board out of cardboard and a clear bottle cap, because I was desperate to confirm my own experiences. "Hello," I said quietly, waiting for a response. Nothing. "I'm sorry if we've moved into your home. I'll be a good roommate. I'm very clean." I began to ramble, but the bottle cap, it never moved. I started to feel silly looking down at the makeshift board. It was just trash, really, and so I pushed it away and climbed into bed, embarrassed that I believed such a thing would even work. That night, I heard something rattling around, though. I initially thought that it was a large house moth or something knocking itself onto my window. I flipped on my bedside lamp and noticed that the board on the floor, only the bottle cap, was standing on its side, spinning like a quarter in fast circles. I let out a breath of air in disbelief, and the cap dropped, once again motionless. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the board, tearing it in half and shoving it in the trash. I kept my lamp on for about an hour before I started to feel tired again. Reluctantly, I flipped the lamp off and I drifted to sleep. I always slept with a blindfold on, irritated by the smallest bit of light, so when I awoke again feeling the cold air of my fan, I assumed that I had kicked my blanket off in my sleep. I felt around the bed, trying to find it to cover myself again, but no luck. I lifted my blindfold and I was horrified to see my blanket standing tall above me. It had to have been about 6 feet, towering over my body. I moved quickly, attempting to throw my feet to the side and run to the door, but the blanket fell, and I was forced back to my mattress, a weight suddenly suffocating me, as if somebody had just laid on top of me. I gasped for breath, trying to scream, but not a sound would escape my throat. I remember my eyelids fluttering as I lost consciousness from the lack of air eventually. That morning, I awoke with my blindfold lifted, my blanket tossed to the side of the bed, and pain taking over my body. I knew that I hadn't imagined it, and I came out of my room and I just couldn't stop myself from crying when I found my mum getting ready for work in the bathroom. I tried to explain, but again she didn't believe me. She never believed me, in fact. "You were dreaming," she said to me. "You can stay home from school today. Try and get some rest." I reluctantly nodded and I went back to bed, still scared to really go back to sleep, but I laid stiff and waited for the sound of my mum and brother leaving for the day. I heard the keys jingle and the door close. I was now alone in the home. I rolled into my stomach and cried into my pillow. I was exhausted, in pain, and scared. For several minutes I laid there crying, and then something happened. "I'm sorry about your mum," a man's voice said, clearly beside me. I gasped and sat straight up, but no one was there. I couldn't handle that. I couldn't handle being alone there anymore. So I got out of bed and walked myself to school, something I was usually too scared to do, but not nearly as scared as I was of whatever was in my home. We moved out of the home shortly after due to my mum getting married, and all related activity stopped, much to my relief, but I'll always wonder what it was and why it only seemed to interact with me. That was the first and strongest presence that I've ever encountered. When I was 11 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night and heard something repeatedly running up and down the hallway. My mother was the only other person in the house, and I know for a fact that she was asleep at that time. The sound that I heard didn't sound like adult footsteps. They sounded more lightweight and rapid, like that of a scampering toddler perhaps. And no, there were no pets in this household. My bedroom was at the dead end of the hallway, and these scampering footsteps would repeatedly run from one end of the hall to the other. But every time they reached the end where my bedroom was situated, there would be a momentary pause in front of my door before resuming. This exact same cycle repeated for about 5 minutes, and then it just abruptly ceased. I sat upright in my bed, petrified with fear the entire time that this was happening, and was much too afraid to open the door during or after. I still have no idea what was making that sound, but I got a distinct feeling that whatever it was seemed to be aware that I was aware of its presence. Don't ask me how I know that. It's just one of those things that you can feel, but you can't rationally explain it. The second incident occurred a few years later when I went down to the basement workshop to retrieve some tools. As I was standing in front of the pegboard selecting what I required, a female voice aggressively growled directly into my left ear. I immediately went into an adrenaline-fueled panic and dropped everything that I had in my hands before sprinting out of the workshop and up the stairs like a frightened cat. Even remembering that now makes me feel an icy chill throughout my entire body, like it did when it happened. That incident was far more traumatic than the previous one. Now, I live in a city in northwestern Canada that is somewhat remote, and the neighborhood that I grew up in is situated on land that was once inhabited by indigenous villages. Apparently, the village that was here was burned to the ground in 1913 by British colonizers who wanted to permanently drive them out of the area so that they could annex the land. Make of that what you will. I don't know if it's connected in any way, but I thought that it might be worthwhile to mention it. So, my question for all of you guys is, has anyone else ever experienced anything like either of these incidences before? And if you have, I would love to hear them.